UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back. It's the home of Common Sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow. We are absolutely rammed at this end. As Julia was saying, so much news around. Emmanuel Macron is here in the UK amid criticism of France's failure to tackle illegal Channel migration crossings, despite us giving him the thick end of £1 billion in UK funding. Labour's scrapping of the Rwanda policy and push for a controversial one-in, one-out migrant deal risks encouraging crossings, not dissuading those who want to somehow jump in a boat and come across the UK. We'll have more on that in just a bit. Also, Lord Tebbit, loyal Thatcherite ally, fierce advocate for conservative values, has died aged 94. Known for his get-on-your-bike remark, privatising British Telecom and his opposition to EU integration, he leaves behind a legacy of patriotism and staunch right-wing politics and principles. Proper principles. This man, you knew where you stood. We'll talk to Dave Wooding about this in just a moment. And the £600 million mobility scheme aids 589,000 disabled people is facing criticism for misuse and waste. It's prompting calls for a stricter oversight while remaining essential for those in genuine need. I mean, you hear anecdotally stories about the fella down the road who's got a bad toe and somehow ended up with a BMW. How true are they? How loyal to the reality are those kind of stories? We'll look at that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. And, of course, chime in and chip in with anything you like along the way. Here's a question. Do you trust the French to come good on immigration? £750,000 we've given to the French. All right, not directly to Macron's own back pocket or his wife's own back pocket, but the French have received nearly £800,000 in UK taxpayer handouts to the French exchequer. I mean, good work if you can get it. The French say it will be money well spent. They claim to stop a third of the boats. Only last week, one of their border force guys whipped out a knife and stabbed a boat to death. It was just the one. Look, le bateau sans air, they cried. That was their evidence that they're doing stuff. Then, like Wile E. Coyote, going for a different tactic, they've offered this curious, and I can scarcely get my head around this. Even when I say it, I'm waiting for someone to go, no, that was just a joke. It wasn't true. This is the one-in, one-out method. And sometimes you have to wonder, not just about the sort of genius, of the piece, but some politicians' basic grasps of mathematics. We want to robustly address illegal immigration because there are too many people coming here. So according to this logic, you get rid of some people, but you take the same number back. Right, you heard that, OK? I think every time somebody hears this for the first time, they assume they heard it wrong. So we return 100 migrants back to France. Hooray! That's what we do for the French system. And then we do this, but they then send 100 back to us. Now, hang on a second. I can see the flaw in this. Take away 100. Let's work this out between us, right? Take away 100, you've got 0, all right? So you're starting off with 100 as your base number, as my maths teacher would have said. Then you've got 0. But then you add another 100, and you've got 100. Yeah, but the system will work, they tell us over there, according to the French. Look, we're taking the illegal migrants. Yes, but we're taking 100 back. It doesn't make any... You don't need to be Bertrand Russell to work this stuff out. We will receive another 235 of your illegal immigrants, they say. And in return, we will give you 235. We solve the problem. No, you don't solve the problem. You've literally... you haven't even neutralised the problem. It's exactly where it began. And now Mr Macron and his wonky abacus, that's not his wife, by the way, have just arrived in the UK. 2 in, none out. They've been greeted by Prince William and Catherine. It was bonjours and air kisses all around, a 3-day visit and a chinwag apparently about immigration. Do you trust the French to come good on this? Now, there is a sort of a very vague theory here. And I genuinely, look, we're talking about our government. It is without a shadow of a doubt. I was just referencing Norman Tebbit, and we'll come back to him in a moment. These sort of towering figures. Where are those politicians? Where are those kind of politicians? You know, the big guns, the big wigs. Where are they? And they're certainly not hanging around in the Labour government at the moment. I don't know what the heck is going on in that respect. So we have this curious situation where Keir Starmer is telling us that there's going to be some kind of announcement, and Macron is there, you know, ready to give his announcings. And we're in this bizarre place where you sort of hope and wonder in a weird way, that there's going to be this amazing, incredible announcement that we all go, wow, what the heck happened there? What happened? They've done it. They've solved it. But then you think this is Starmer's government, back to the sort of bereft of Norman Tebbit-like characters. Where are they? So do you think for one moment there's going to be this, Macron's going to stand up and say this afternoon, bonjour tout le monde, and hello to the United Kingdom, and he's going to nod his head, he's met the king and the royal family and stuff, and he's going to say, right, I know you think I've been a bit rubbish on this, but have a listen to this. And his wife will say, he's good, him, isn't he? It's the third go at that. So listen, that's where we're at. Or are we? Do you expect the French, do you trust the French to come good on immigration? We are delighted that Dave Wooding is back with us, top journalist and all-round good bloke. How are you, Dave?
All right, Ian, good to be back.
Good to see you again. Lots to get through here, of course. We are, I mean, more than anything else, discussing French president over here for a state visit. Seems a bit is it underwhelming as a state visit? I don't know. I don't know what I was expecting. I can't remember the last state visit as a
well, he was greeted by the Princess of Wales. He's going to Windsor Castle tonight. So I think when they
put him in a carriage a little earlier.
We'll see all that. I'm sure once all the pictures start coming out. Of course, it'll be bigger for him back home because in the French press and the French television, they'll be playing it large. Our man's out there with the king, so I'm sure.
And everything's going good. There was a moment, by the way. I mean, the biggest breaking news is that his wife didn't smack him around the face as they got off the aeroplane, but she
playfully, of course.
She did it playfully, yes, just a bit of horseplay. But she did avoid his hand. I don't know if you saw that. As she came down the steps, he put his hand out to escort her down the steps, and she refused to hand over le hand.
Yes, well,
didn't happen. Do we read too much into that?
Well, I mean, of course, in France, they probably won't know anything about this because their privacy laws are 10 times worse than they are over here. So they probably don't even know. I once went to cover a story about involved somebody's private life in France many years ago, and suddenly the lawyers came on and said, we cannot send the paper out into France tomorrow.
Wow.
Because of the privacy laws.
Le Monde said no.
They're so big, yeah.
It's weird, isn't it? Because simultaneously, there was an era in French politics where you just assumed that the president or whoever was prime or whatever was just having loads of affairs. I mean, that was kind of a given,
exactly.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, nobody blinked that Chirac was, you know, off on a powwow down at the Moulin Rouge back room. Nobody gave a monkeys about that.
And there was a story, I can't remember the precise details, about somebody who was a French official of some kind who was given a big job as director of finance on the EU many years ago, and he had a criminal conviction for fraud and embezzlement, and there was some rule which had banned publication of this.
Well, it's interesting because I know that I know I've been a little bit mischievous on my intro on this about his wife. There was all these kind of internet rumours that his wife is actually a bloke and all this sort of stuff, but. I don't buy much into that, but the point is, every time a journalist has tried to talk about that, you're right, the lawyers' letters come thick and fast.
Yeah, you're slapped down
thick and fast, yeah.
I'm sure they are just rumours, of course, but the internet's a world of its own these days.
Indeed, and you know, she looked rather glorious and female-like when she arrived today. That's all I can say, really. If the lawyers are watching, I'm a big fan of Bridget. So there you go. So anyway, this channel migration thing, Dave, this is the big one, isn't it? Julia was just saying to me in the break, is there going to be a big announcement that, you know, it's going to take us all by surprise?
Well, normally when they have a big announcement, they give us a bit of a taster the day before so that they can get 2 hits out of it. We've got this special deal, and on day 2 you get the big deal.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been anything. And I suspect there's a bit of a logjam behind the scenes, and that they haven't really thrashed out the finer detail at best. But if they are keeping a lid on it, and there is something, it must be one hell of a thumping big story.
I mean, it kind of ties in with you know, what I was saying earlier about the sort of ineptitude of the government, and we'll come on to Norman Tebbit shortly. But it did make me think, because we were talking beforehand about, you know, the big beasts, and I know there's a little bit of rose-coloured glasses. You've covered politics for a long time, Dave, and you know some of those big beasts perhaps retrospectively look bigger than they were. I don't know. There's a little, maybe that we project a bit onto, you know, the golden eras and stuff, but there's no doubt about it. This government is definitely lacking in big beasts.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to be like, you don't go, we know what they're planning here because we know what their central philosophy is, because we don't know anything.
Well, that's part of the problem. There is no vision. There is no, what does Keir Starmer stand for is a question people have been asking. Does he stand for perhaps winning the next election, or does he stand for you know, just getting into power in the first place? There doesn't seem to be a mission. I remember Tony Blair. You felt, you know, come with me, I'll show you up this way. And if you agree with him or not, at least you knew where he was going.
Correct.
And the same with Margaret Thatcher.
100%.
You may have loathed the woman, but she won through elections because the people who did like her consistently voted for her because they knew what they were getting.
But even the ones that didn't knew where she stood.
Yes.
It's like you could point to it, go, that's what she's about. I have no idea what this government's about.
And it's been a little bit like that for a while, Ian. I mean, we've had, you know, Rishi Sunak. We sort of knew what Liz Truss stood for, but quickly that didn't work
short-lived.
out. Boris was a little bit, who was described as a shopping trolley, wasn't he, by one of his aides. He knew where he was going a little bit, but he could never get us there.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, we'll wait and see whether there's going to be a big announcement. He is obviously off to Downing Street at some point, and there's a big banquet this evening. I'd love to be at one. Did you ever get to go to a banquet when you were?
Not to. I went to state events, you know, where I've been into receptions with, it was the Queen in the day when I was covering those things, but never been sat down at a state banquet. No.
I don't know what they. I don't know how they. I mean, they're so big, aren't they?
Yeah, they're huge.
I mean, do you have to ask the fella at the end to pass the salt? I mean, that
I don't know. I mean,
that could take an hour.
I mean, it would take you more than an hour to get dressed. I can tell you that much. I've been to some functions where the white. I don't know. You've been to a white tie do, but
the white tie do,
is
not
just
the black tie.
Another level from black tie.
Yeah.
It takes ages just to put the cufflinks on.
And I struggle with that on a good day. Let's move to this story. Criminals in Britain's jails hooked on drugs and daytime TV. This is a story about certain prisoners who are finding themselves getting high on drugs, cannabis, cocaine, while watching the telly all day, according to a warning from the prison's watchdog. Drones, apps and prison officers are helping gangs deliver drugs and weapons directly to inmates. This is an extraordinary story. Let's have a little listen to a clip from the Channel 4 documentary UK Prisons Exposed.
I've seen it so many times, so many different occasions. It could have been like a Nando's from outside or a KFC. It could be phones, it could be drugs, it could be anything. We call it patterning up with them. I'll show you a couple of videos that I've got, bits and bobs that we used to.
Oh wow.
Krispy Kreme donuts. Wow. Alcohol, Ciroc, Bossier.
That's nuts, man. Because I'm thinking that how have they got that onto the wing?
It's like night officers. They could come through. I said it could be the day officers.
And how much would someone pay for like a bucket of KFC, for example?
Again, that all depends on the officer. If she wants to say to you 500 quid and you really want it, you're going to pay her 500 quid for a KFC bargain bucket.
That's an expensive
KFC, boy.
You see, what that has done, Dave, is changed my entire perception of going to jail. If I think I can get a KFC while I'm in there, I mean, man alive. I mean, that is a game changer, frankly. I mean, I've always thought, and this is going to sound like either just stupid or naive or maybe both, that if I was in charge of a prison, I could make it 100% bulletproof. Nothing would get in there. But, of course, if you run one, I'm pretty sure the governors want it to be like that, but it leaks like a bad sieve, doesn't it?
There's this balance they have between discipline and order. I mean, if they have too much discipline and there's a bit of a revolt from the prison, they all want an easy life, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's a hard job being inside a prison, and these prison officers are, you know, putting their lives at risk to protect us by keeping the most dangerous people locked away.
Sure.
I mean, don't forget the recent instances of one of the notorious prisoners throwing hot water over somebody who was making a cup of tea and attacking people with a makeshift blade. Yes.
Yeah.
So it is dangerous, but then you can't keep them all locked up 24 hours a day, and maybe they're understaffed. The prison officers,
I'm sure
they are tinderboxes, these places.
So what do you give you give a little tip to a bit of a moody officer and say, bring us a bargain bucket in, and they bring a bargain bucket in, what, in their rucksack? I mean, would that not get, you know? That's
I mean, they are breaking the rules if they do that.
Yeah.
Really. I mean,
well, they are, because chicken doesn't travel well. The rules are always eat it when. Oh, you mean the prison rule?
These drones, though, they can get, according to this report by Charlie Taylor, who was the chief inspector of prisons, they can get within 3 feet of a designated point, and there's talk about them dropping drugs into grass with fake grass over the top of the drones, and they're now saying they could even help prisoners to escape. These drones are so sophisticated. So
I mean, I just find that bizarre. Can they spot a drone with a bargain bucket hanging out the back of it? You might think it'd be like, oh, it's the KFC flight coming in.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, talk about, what do you call it? These home delivery things.
Yes.
It's not like a man.
Well, I mean, they're ahead of Deliveroo on this, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, when I'm. If you've ever been in the garden and ordered a takeaway, and then you've got to come out the garden, go in your house, 21st century problems, somebody's at the door, you answer the door, and you go, oh, my food's here, thank you very much indeed. I'll go back to the garden, and he goes, number? And you go, what? Oh, God, I can't remember, it's on my phone, I'll go back to the garden. I've left that in the garden, you come back, yes, number 86, mate, and then away you go. This seems like the most efficient food delivery business.
So move out of your posh house and go into prison, and you get Deliveroo coming right to your window.
There you go. I'm less scared of pokey than I ever was. Dave Wooding is with us. More stories still to come. We will, of course, look at wealth taxes. That's big on the agenda at the moment. I know Alex talked about this a lot yesterday. It's not going away. And Norman Tebbit has died. We'll look at his life as well. Dave's staying with us for a bit too. 0344 499 1000.
breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, does these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 22 minutes after 1 o'clock. Dave Wooding, the journalist, is with us. Let's look at this story, Dave. Lord Tebbit, Thatcher ally, has died aged 94. Known for a lot of things, of course, particularly the get on your bike comment, remarks on Brexit. He leaves a legacy of patriotism and free market reforms. Let's have a listen to that famous that famous comment from the Conservative Party conference. This is Blackpool, 1981.
I grew up in the 30s with an unemployed father. He didn't riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and he kept looking till he found it.
Yeah. It's funny how that got misquoted so often, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bit like Thatcher's "don't believe in society" comment. Norman Tebbit's telling people to get on their bikes. Well, he didn't quite say that. He was just talking about, if you can't find it, go and look for it.
Absolutely, and that was one of the hallmarks of him. He was quite an outspoken man. Yeah. But also you knew where he stood, as we were discussing earlier. Norman Tebbit was. He was a right-hand man to Margaret Thatcher in a way.
Yeah,
and he was in that. He got his job strangely because don't really remember this, but Cecil Parkinson had to resign over his affair. When does that happen anymore?
Yeah, I know.
With Sarah Keyes, and he was put into the Cecil Parkinson job, and then suddenly became this giant. And the other thing he was known for was he was known as the Chingford skinhead.
That's
he
right.
Still spoke with his Essex accent.
This is Ian Duncan Smith's seat now, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. He still spoke with his Essex accent, despite he went to he was a grammar school boy. Spoke with his Essex accent. I think it was Harold Macmillan who once said, "Who's that speaking there? He's a Tory cabinet minister, apparently." So he was, unusual in his day.
Yeah, he changed the type, and of course, Spitting Image famously had him in leathers on a motorcycle, didn't they, with a few tattoos.
But, he was described by one Labour minister or shadow minister as a semi-house trained polecat.
That's right.
And then we in the tabloid papers, I remember, we used to call him, Tory tough guy or bother boy or cabinet boot boy.
Yeah.
And that took off a little. Norman, bite your legs, Tebbit, or Norman, right, get on your bike, Tebbit.
Yeah.
And that took off, and it was Spitting Image who then portrayed him as this hitman with knuckle dusters.
Yeah, and he was kind of on it, and he took no nonsense, and of course he survived the 1984 Brighton bomb, where the IRA bombed the Grand Hotel. His wife sadly was paralysed for life after that.
Yes.
that attack, and he carried on. He was part carer for her as well. I'm sure we had him on at some point. There's a kind of strange thing with some old, what they call, grandees, Tory grandees, who kind of continued to go, like Heseltine still comes on. And Tebbit did for a while, not for maybe 10 or 15 years, but he used to.
He was always there. It was before my period and in the Commons, but if I ever needed somebody to give me a bit of perspective and a quote, you could ring Lord Tebbit, as he was, and he would always answer the phone. He would always return your call. He would write you a piece if you needed, but he'd give you a quote. Yeah. And he always had a comment if you needed him. He returned your calls.
But as we were saying at the top, Dave, it was the kind of era of the big beasts.
Yes.
People where you could, these guys are tough. They're fair but tough. They know, what they stand for. They know what they stand for. There was no ambiguity there. And you look at politics since, as we were just discussing, and this isn't just Starmer, as you rightly said, but that was definitely a time when you kind of knew where these people stood. I mean, Tebbit and Thatcher, I think a lot of people would say, I'd give anything to see a duo like that running the place.
Well, yes, you knew what they stood for and where they were going. There was no one side or the. I mean, if they like this government, are they in favour of cutting benefits or not? Are they in favour of special needs care for children or not. I mean, they keep changing their minds. And we, in fairness, we had it with the last Tory government.
Correct.
You know, there's no path along which we're going. We knew where we were going with Margaret Thatcher. Privatisation of the railways and the telephone system and so forth.
But that's why Farage does well, isn't it?
Yes.
Because there is that sense, and I know, you know, he does often need to put a bit more meat on the bone. You know, he's not obliged to do that right now, no more than any other party, but there is a general sense that, you know, Reform UK, they know where there's an underpinning of direction in what they're doing. Yeah, and
again, after we lost the Tory government in 1997, we had another long period of a government. We knew what they were doing, which was Tony Blair. Yeah. Again, love him or loathe him, you knew exactly what he was doing with Britain and where he was taking us. I mean, he wanted to take us into the single currency, remember, and that was only stifled by Gordon
Thank God
Brown.
for Gordon.
Yes, and he was involved in ever closer union. I always believe that was one reason we voted for Brexit, because people thought Tony Blair had given too much away to the EU. But we knew where we stood with Tony Blair. Yeah. And now it just seems to be a bit wishy-washy, and people are managing the country rather than running the country.
That's exactly it. And I felt that since the coalition, really. In particular, there was a sense... OK, with a coalition, it's a bit inevitable because you've got, you know, two parties running it, and they did it pretty amicably, but it felt like a management rather than a government.
Yeah. I think Rishi was a good chief executive, but he's not
exactly.
He wasn't anything else.
Let's go to this story there. This keeps rumbling away. The wealth tax, because we know there's a massive black hole. I mean, God, if Rachel Reeves thought she had a black hole when she turned up in July, God knows what it looks like now. I mean, it's just a chasm out there now. And, of course, this is partly of their own making because they've had to row back on certain areas where they were going to save money. And this agitation, this need that some are suggesting for a wealth tax is looming closer. Keir Starmer hasn't ruled it out. Will he go there?
Well, I think that Rachel Reeves has painted herself into a bit of a corner. They've said, and they've reiterated, there will be no increased taxes for working people. Yeah. So that means, to me, income tax, national insurance, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So where's she going to get the money from? She tried getting it off the pensioners from the winter fuel allowance. They've given that back now. They've tried it with benefit cuts. Yep. They've given that back now. So she hasn't got any much of options on where to go. So wealth tax has to be something that's there. And Neil Kinnock was mentioning it, Ian.
Yeah, he suggested a 2% wealth tax.
Yeah, now he's been having words with the number 10 people. So, you know, does he know something we don't know? Is he been advising them to do that, and is he putting pressure on them? But I just don't know where else they're going to get it from.
The trouble with, as far as I mean, we can explore the kind of moral arguments about a wealth tax. You know, do you just say that every time, you know, the chips are down, we'll just go to the rich people, they can pay for it, and then you get to a situation where they'd just be paying for everything, you know, if you carried that through. So there is a moral thing, even though it's a hard argument to have because you're talking about people who are stinking rich. There is a basic reality that you could be stinking rich and have a lot of assets, but not necessarily a lot of money. So if you've suddenly got this £10 million mansion that, you know, was gifted to you down the years by, you know, some old rich duffer in the family, no one's going to cry because you've got to pay a few more quid, but you literally might not have a few more. The taxman goes, right, we want 200 grand a year from you, please. You go, well, where am I going to get 200 grand? I could sell the mansion, but if I sell the mansion, I cease to become somebody who will pay the wealth tax.
Well, this is like the farmers' arguments.
Correct.
The farmers leaving the farm to the family. It's a family business. If they're then going to be taxed on that farm, there's no option but to sell it to pay the duties. Yeah. And again, we talk about the mansions, Ian. It's not necessarily mansions. It might be detached houses. People who own a house which they've worked hard for, mum and dad die and leave it to their kids. Yeah. The kids might want to go and live in that house, but they can't because they're going to get clobbered for tax on it.
That's true.
So wealth tax, the word wealth, it's all right when you're not a wealthy person, you're a working person, but when you start looking at it closely, it can start impacting on...
Well, indeed, and you also have to ask realistically, how much money would it raise in these circumstances? I wonder whether they should just be a bit more... Because the asset... It's a 2% wealth tax on assets is the Kinnock suggestion, and we spoke to this group called patriotic millionaires last week, where they've got, you know, their members say, yeah, 80% of them are willing to do this, or so we were told. But could you not just put a 2% tax on earnings rather than assets? Would that not be a more sensible way of doing it?
Possibly would.
I don't know. If you wanted to go down that route.
I don't know. I mean, but
well, you should know, Dave. You're going to be one of the ones affected by this with your property portfolio.
The problem
owns half of Kent and most of Cheshire.
If they did want to go down this road,
yeah.
There's the danger again of business people leaving the country already. I mean, there's nowhere else for them to go, and the government don't seem to want to make cuts. Every time they're faced with they keep telling us they've got tough decisions to make, but when they come to make these tough decisions, as a hue and cry, they suddenly scream.
We don't do tough decisions around here.
The only thing that makes me think also that this is a possible goer is that none of the Labour MPs would balk at this one, and there would certainly be no rebellion. This is one instance where he could get it through the Commons.
They'd be popping their dandelion and burdock bottles, wouldn't they, on that? Listen, good to see you, Dave.
Okay, pleasure.
Dave Wooding with us here on the programme. Annunziata Rees-Mogg is going to join us in a couple of moments as well, talking about that Macron visit. Is she waving her French flag? I very much doubt it. We'll get her views on what's going on. And, of course, over to you as well. In terms of that question that we kicked off with at the beginning, do you trust the French to come good on immigration? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Never miss Kev's political asylum. It's best listened to, frankly, while in the kitchen having a beer, cooking some munch. If you're putting some food together, alcohol will, I promise you, I know it's not the most advised or trendy way of selling lifestyles these days, but yeah, alcohol assistance, because you get to enjoy and partake in the incredulity and the anger of the moment that only comes via the conduit of Kevin O'Sullivan. He's back tonight at 7 o'clock right here on Talk. So, it's finally happened. Emmanuel Macron has put his feet onto British soil. A huge visit. Sparked some major criticism, of course, on the way over his failure to curb channel crossings. We have given, you ready for this number, £771 million. That's your money. your money to the French exchequer. £771 million to France in order for them to assist in stopping the boats. Spoiler alert, they ain't stopped the boats. Yeah, migration surging, the Brexit reset deals raising sovereignty concerns. Macron's focus seems to be more on political posturing than real solutions. But do you trust him and the French to come good on immigration? Let's speak to Annunziata Rees-Mogg on this very issue. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I was hoping you'd have like a French flag behind you, you know, like waving away with a window open just to give it a little bit of animation. But I'm assuming you decided against this today.
There's one good thing about the French flag. It's red, white and blue, but they're in the wrong order.
That's very, yes, indeed. The wrong pattern altogether.
Wrong pattern.
Indeed. So listen, I mean, obviously it's a state visit. We're a very decent people over here. We know how to put on we do pomp and pageantry like no one else on the planet. We have carriages made of solid gold and horses worth more than the national debt of several small countries. We've certainly know how to welcome someone. Are we welcoming the right man though?
This is all out of the Keir Starmer playbook. Macron is essentially impotent at home. He leads a minority government. He's facing a huge threat from Le Pen. He needs to grandstand on the international stage. And so does Keir Starmer. It suits both of them very well, but it's not in either country's interests.
What is in terms of the reasons for a state visit, I mean, is it, well, in the past, as far as you can ascertain, is it really just merely a showcase for, oh, look, we all get on rather well, we're from similar kind of democracies, similar sized economies, and this is just a bit of showboating? Is it that, or is there something more substantive to these kind of visits?
I think, generally speaking, all the deals are done well away from the state visit. Yeah. The conversations will have been going on a long time. They'll have been between officials. And then it's kind of the wrap party, if you like, that you have the big celebration, the big gala, and it makes everyone look great. We know in diplomatic terms that state visits do have an impact because world leaders have this weird habit of liking to be feted and celebrated and being showered in the pomp and ceremony. We are so good at giving, and part of that is us having the strongest royal family in the world.
Yeah, but also the vanity, the sort of vainglorious nature of contemporary politicians. We were talking a second ago about Norman Tebbit, a big, proper old good, proper conservative character who's, he reached a good old age, but he sadly died. We don't have those kind of figures. We have people like Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron on the circuit. And I would imagine when Macron and co are on a state visit, the royal banquet, the gold carriages and all that goes with it is exactly why they're in the job they're in. They're attracted to that. Never done a hard day's work in their life, but, they quite like the bits that go with it.
They like the trappings. Yeah. I think I've been thinking about Norman Tebbit today, as I'm sure many people have. And one of the things that I think really stood out to me about him was how humble he was, how he put aside his own political ambition. He was loyal. He was incredibly dedicated to Margaret, his wife, who obviously was so badly injured in the Brighton bomb. And you can't really imagine any of these current world leaders being like that. You can't imagine them foregoing the free glasses and the tickets to concerts and the, indeed, royal state visits in order to actually do a good job. They put themselves above their countries.
Absolutely right. And there was a very real sense, I was just talking to Dave Wooding, the journalist, on this, a very real sense that you knew what those governments and those people and those loyal figures stood for. You didn't have to look too deeply to know that this is the Conservative Party, this is who they are, this is what they believe, and this is their direction of travel.
There was a vision with values and principles behind it. And now I think we've got people who want power for power's sake and the benefits that come with that. I don't think Keir Starmer has a clue what he wants to do. Yeah. There isn't a single policy he hasn't U-turned on, except for, as one of my colleagues said yesterday, growth. that he has accidentally U-turned on growth by making sure we do not have any. They're killing our economy, they're killing our society, and they are not going to go anywhere near solving immigration. And this one in, one out deal that we're told is happening with France, well, 1 + 1 - 1 is exactly where we are now.
100%. You don't need to, as I said at the beginning, you don't need to be Bertrand Russell to know that, you know, the mathematics really don't... Hang on a sec. So you take 100 people. OK, that's good. So far, we're with you, French people. We're with you. You take 100 people. Oh, I see. You give us 100 people back. Right, that doesn't quite solve the problem. We've got 172,255 people who come across the channel since 2018. It's a jaw-dropping number.
It is, and there will still be tens of thousands coming under this deal. It makes no difference whatsoever. And as you said earlier in the show, we've already paid the French £771 million. But the cost to us of immigration is 11 million a day just for hotels. That we could in 2 months pay that again if the French actually stop the boats.
Yeah.
The problem is they've got no intention of doing so, but they're very happy to take our money, and they want a reconvergence. In the words of the Elysee, this Anglo-French summit is about a reconvergence with France and with the EU. That is not what the British people asked for. It's not what we voted for in Brexit. But Starmer seems set on giving away British sovereignty to whoever will take it, whether it's Mauritius in the Chagos Islands, Spain over Gibraltar, the UN over our tax laws, or indeed France over our borders.
Yeah. My colleague Julia Hartley-Brewer said earlier that she conceded that this may be wildly over-optimistic, that is there going to be this incredible cat pulled out of the bag or rabbit out of the hat, whatever, that suddenly the likes of you and I are going to sit there and go, oh my goodness, they've actually done it. Here's Emmanuel with a big announcement, and here's Keir standing beside him going, oh, Emmanuel, aren't you great? And away they go with a big announcement, channel migration solved.
I would, you know, eat my socks or hat or whatever one says. I think it's highly unlikely they will have anything that will actually work. I think there is very likely to be an announcement that's meant to make it sound good, but the reality will not be.
I sense you might be right. I wonder what the likes of Norman Tebbit would, you know, when you go back to that, even your father's era, you know, when he was mighty editor at the Times, how they would be covering this story. I mean, he would have been discombobulating by the day, as would Mr. Tebbit.
I mean, I believe on certain channels there's a particular phrase about people eating cheese and surrendering that one's not allowed to say. But I think it's us that have become the surrender people. We're flying the white flag to every country across the world saying, we're for sale, take what you want. And I think that's incredibly sad for our country. And it shows just what a terrible leader Keir Starmer is.
Indeed. And I wonder whether this sort of evangelical globalism that seems to run through these guys. When I felt the same really about Rishi Sunak to a degree. When I would see him or Keir Starmer, that horrendous guy from Canada, Trudeau, no longer around. It gets worse, this list, by the way. Jacinda Ardern, these kind of people. You know, you'd see them at these meetings and think, oh my goodness, talk about groupthink and this just anti-intellectual global position where they're all puffing and fluffing and preening their whiskers and each other's whiskers because they think they're onto something, but no central philosophy.
I think to the extent there is a philosophy, it's that we should be one globe and that we shouldn't have nation states. We shouldn't have patriotism. We shouldn't have nationalism. We shouldn't have belief in our own cultures, our own histories. We shouldn't have our own identity or our own ability to make our laws and change them. That it suits globalists very well if tax is high everywhere. So that's what the UN has done. It's told everyone to put up taxes. Keir Starmer did not have to sign that, but he did because he wants to undermine our nation as well.
Yeah. Listen, great to have you on with us. Lovely to speak again. We will speak soon. Annunziata Rees-Mogg with us on the programme. Speaking, just a dose of common sense. It's always nice to chat to her. It's just the only thing missing is a beer and a glass of vino, right? Her thoughts on that and, of course, crucially, yours. 0344 499 1000. Paul's in Brighton on this issue. First-time caller, Paul. Welcome to the programme. Can we trust the French to sort the problem?
No, Ian. Macron has been fly-tipping migrants. He's been fly-tipping.
Fly-tipping, that's a great phrase. That really tells it like it is.
Yes, so the French have cost us not tens of billions, hundreds of billions over this last so many years. That's why we can't afford a proper surface fleet of naval craft. We can't afford the proper things to give to our people. And every single one of these boat grifters who come across will fail the Tebbit test. Every single one of them, and no doubt their descendants will all fail the Tebbit
100%. And this is what makes the whole... It's not just, as I think you've rightly identified, Paul, it's not just the issue of lots of people coming. I'm sure, on any day of the week, some of these are very nice people. Don't dispute that. It's not a personal attack on any individual. But it's not just about the numbers. It's about where we're going to be in 10 years' time. Will these people become the next doctors and engineers? No. Will they find themselves, bearing in mind many speak little or no English at all, are they likely to assimilate with the population? No. So what's the point of this?
Well, the doctors and engineers in all these third world countries, they have no reason to up sticks and move. We're getting the dregs.
The ones that do up sticks and move do it through the proper channels and, form successful careers. And no one has a problem with that.
Yeah, we're getting the knuckle draggers.
Do you think the French this afternoon are about to make a big announcement, Paul, that's going to make, as I said to our last guest, it'll make the likes of me and you keep quiet forever because they've solved it?
Well, if it was legal, I'd be throwing something at Macron, but it's not legal.
No.
If I was along the streets as he came by in the coast, I might have a bag of tomatoes by me. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a handy Bazooka Joe in there as well. Listen, Paul, thank you very much for starting us off. Paul in Brighton, not buying into it. Again, there's no other way when we talk about channel migration. You find yourself sort of trying to thread an odd, not light-hearted, a kind of a wry smile. I don't know if it's resignation. Because the figures are so big, the numbers are so big on this. As I said a second ago, if you look at the figures, these are just the official ones from 2018. So this is 6.5 years, just 6.5 years. 172,000, over 172,000 migrants across the Channel. 172,000. Just think about that. Imagine pretty much 2 lots of Wembley Stadium. Imagine the population of several towns around the UK, often collectively. And the figures are so big, and the ineptitude is so galling, and the upshot is so obviously damaging, that you think this story is so big. And oddly, despite us banging on about it and very few other places, doesn't really, this would be, you'd think, front page news every day. Sometimes it doesn't make the news at all, even over the course of a week. So yes, you do have to sort of find yourself going, it's so severe that it's almost funny. Even though, of course, we know underneath it's not funny at all. Can the French pull a froglet out of the bag? See what I did there? It's the only way, without using the previous reference that was alluded to a moment ago from our last guest. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The deal on the table at the moment is a terrible one. Terrible. It would have a 60-day ceasefire. Israel would get only 10 living hostages out of 20, so it keeps 10 trapped there. 18 bodies, another 12 bodies trapped there, and basically gives Hamas a seat at the table to negotiate what happens the day after. The deal that the Qataris are proposing basically allows Hamas to keep on to living and dead hostages as bargaining chips to try to survive the war that it started.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, yes. It is the home of common sense. Let's go back to your calls. James is in Staffordshire. How are you doing, James?
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, fire away. What have you got for us?
I'm going to have to sadly disagree with all the people from Labour and yourself and Julie Hartley-Brewer, who said Rwanda would never work. Rwanda is working perfectly. If you onboard all of your migrant problems to another country, then it works. Although we are France's Rwanda, but we pay them, oddly.
So there is demonstrable evidence that such a system can work.
Absolutely, because you look at how fast they're trying to get across in droves. What I really cannot understand is why we can't just intern them. You have a nice old RAF base, double the height fence to 20 feet.
Yep.
Stick a bunch of tents in because that's what they do in Jordan and all the other countries. 3 square meals a day, minimum basic care. I don't get it.
Nobody's to be treated badly. No one's going to get beaten. You make it, you make it civilized. You make it, but it's obviously a strict system because 172,000 people have come uninvited into a country. That would make more sense. I think that also would probably stop some people coming here, which is kind of partly the point, right?
Well, you can offer them £3,000 to go home.
Yeah.
And then the other
you could with the Rwanda scheme.
No, I'm saying here. So
here, yes, I see. Yeah, which would be much cheaper.
You're in that nice little internment camp. That's where you're going to stop until we've actually got proof of where you are. And sorry, mate, you don't get your new PlayStation, because the human rights lawyers won't let you have the old PlayStation 2. You're going to have the new PlayStation and this, that, and the other. And the downside is our Prime Minister is a human rights lawyer. So he looks at every problem coming from the rights of
through that prism, and probably, I think I don't think you can. If you opt to be a human rights lawyer, when you study law, there's loads of areas you can go: financial, contractual, land, whatever you like. If you opt for that, then I don't think you suddenly get rid of that when you become Prime Minister. I think that stays with you, doesn't it? It sort of underpins your kind of guidance all the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I must admit, I was thinking about being a human rights lawyer, but I never met my father, so...
There you go. Now we know. James, thank you for that. James in Staffordshire. Great call. This comes in from Kate in Warwickshire. Reference Norman Tebbit. He correctly predicted the awful issues with Gender Recognition Act 2004 and ignored an unsung hero to women, says Kate. I hadn't really correlated that, Kate. Thank you very much for that. One from Debbie. I'm surprised Macron didn't arrive by boat, escorted by the Royal Navy, who aren't allowed to escort invaders across France. Wouldn't that have been something if he'd literally arrived on a small boat? And this one from Darren in South Wales. There's only one thing I trust less than Macron, and that's 2 tiers negotiating skills. The other thing is, the more that come illegally, the more that they can send over legally when the illegal ones are returned to France. Guess what is going to happen? God help us. Yeah, it's so beyond comprehension. The one in, one out thing. Apparently, to put it bluntly, you're meant to get a better class of immigrant. That's the theory behind it. So you'll get people who have been through, they've been through the system, they've been checked, and they've apparently got to have a relative over here or something of that nature. But yeah, it doesn't really work because we're also talking about numbers as well as who is coming here. Let's get a voice note on that very issue from Craig.
despite the mathematics of the one-in, one-out deal, can we actually trust the French to actually send us a genuine asylum seeker in return for one of the illegals? What's to say that they receive 100 illegals on their shores, then automatically stamp them all saying, yeah, you've been processed, you're legitimate, put them back on the boat, and off they come back to Britain?
It's a very good point. Yeah, they tell you we're getting Pierre Lafayette, who's properly westernised. Domway's a great guy. He's got like a degree and stuff. And then he shows up and kind of Scooby-Doo style, the mask is ripped off and it ain't Pierre after all. Some other chancer from Iran who studied something a bit iffy at a Moody University in Tehran. You think, really? I don't know. We can't trust anything. All I know is whatever people are talking, one in, one out, it's aside from anything else. Talk about cultural assimilation. Let's just look at the number. It's a numbers game, Mr. Macron. It's a numbers game, Mr. Starmer. It's a numbers game, Labour government. So, yeah, I mean, you can stick your one in, one out thing. It doesn't make any sense. It's bonkers. But in addition to all of that, we're still left with 172,000 people. What happens to all of them? Do you trust the French to come good on this? 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. We're back after the news at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. A lot to focus on here this afternoon. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is here. It is a state visit to Blighty, visiting the UK amid criticism over France's failure to tackle illegal channel crossings. This is despite us giving them £771 million in UK funding. Labour scrapping in the Rwanda policy and a push for controversial one-in, one-out deals does risk encouraging more crossings, it seems, but we'll look at that in more detail. Also, as we've covered as well, in the last few hours we learned that Lord Tebbit, Norman Tebbit, loyal Thatcher ally and fierce advocate for conservative values, has died aged 94. He was very well known for many things, including the get on your bike remark, privatising British Telecom and his opposition to EU integration. He does leave behind, undoubtedly, a legacy of patriotism and staunch right-wing principles. He will be missed. Will we see his like again? And the £600 million mobility scheme aids 589,000 disabled people, but it's facing criticism for misuse and waste, prompting calls for stricter oversight while remaining essential for those genuinely in need. And I keep coming back to the same point. Julia mentioned it. Her guest, Tom Slater, he made the same point as well. I think most people want their tax pounds to go to people who are really in need. In fact, not just to assist, but to even double down and give more to those really in need. It's how many people sit outside the really in need criteria, which is the source of the problem. Theo Usherwood is with us, a political commentator and, of course, a regular with us on the programme. Afternoon to you, Theo. So here he is. He's here. French President Mr Macron has arrived with his wife. Big visit from William and Kate at the airport, and then off in a carriage somewhere else. He's met the King and the Queen. Big banquet tonight. It's not a bad gig, is it?
No, it's not. But of course, the undercurrent, what they're trying to sort out in the margins in those talks is some sort of deal which is actually going to bring the numbers of people crossing the English Channel from the north coast of France to the UK down. Now, we've given the French hundreds of millions of pounds to try and stop those migrant crossings. It's not made the blindest bit of difference. The crossings are up 50% on last year alone by this point, and Keir Starmer is hoping that he'll be able to reach some sort of a deal with Emmanuel Macron, but whereby if you've crossed the channel and you have a family member in this country, you'll be able to stay, but otherwise you'll go back to France. But this is a fiendishly complex deal, and of course the government would like to think it's some sort of bilateral agreement with France, but of course it will have a knock-on impact when you go to Italy, when you go to other European countries, because of course the migrants continue to cross through Turkey and into Europe. That from the east, and then of course from the south and northern coast of Africa into Italy. And of course France, if it wants to sign this deal with the UK, it'll either become the bottleneck for these migrants who arrive and then become stuck in France, or there's going to have to be a pushback against migrants arriving from Italy. And of course that's by no means agreed. So it feels a little bit like a shot in the dark trying to get this agreement. And the danger, of course, is that because it's become public now, what you're going to see is a huge rush to cross the English Channel over the course of the summer to get to Britain before any agreement is struck.
Especially when the weather's
look out the window, sun shining.
It's lovely. It's going to be like that for the next couple of weeks. It's a great kind of, the optics for me are interesting. I've always made this point, so forgive me if you're a regular listener, but with the channel migrant thing, it doesn't matter where you stand on this, that you've got two countries, two leaders, two lots of military, two lots of intelligence, two home secretaries between the two lots of border force. In a world where we're almost about to land on Mars, I can make a Hollywood Pixar type movie on my iPhone through artificial intelligence. Elon Musk can reverse a rocket back into its pod, but you can't stop a bunch of guys on a boat crossing the channel. I mean, that seems unbelievable.
It does, and of course there was I saw a very to the point cartoon where they were saying, you know, we're going to stop the Russians, and we've got these new bombers that are going to be able to drop tactical nuclear weapons to save us all from the Russians. But of course, and then in the cartoon, the joke was, yes, but what happens if the Russians decide to arrive by a small boat?
Everyone's safe. Sorry, we can't touch them, Governor.
But that, you know, this is the problem, and of course, the government has, you know, and this is quite right, has said, some of your listeners might disagree, but this is something I think personally is, you know, it's made the call that it's not prepared to forcibly turn round the boats in the middle of the English Channel, because there would obviously be, certainly in the first instance, there'd be an exceptional loss of life, and that's something that they're not prepared to countenance. Now, I personally think that's the right view, but short of that, it's very difficult to see what else can be done. I mean, they even looked, you know, last government, the Tories looked at reports of wave machines. They looked at flotillas to try and stop the migrants crossing. But the other tool, of course, that they had also considered, and what the Tories had in motion, was the Rwanda scheme, a deportation scheme, whereby people would be sent directly to Rwanda. But at the moment, we remain part of the European Convention on Human Rights. There's no indication from this government, quite the opposite, in fact, that it wants to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. And so when you have migrants in this country and they're going through the system, and they can often claim Article, you know, whether it's Article 8, right to a family life, they can stay, well, you know, you've got the chicken nugget excuse or whatever, that means that they can stay in this country, and we're not prepared, and they couldn't be deported under the Rwanda scheme, because that would go against the ECHR.
I wonder if this is, I remember, this is not betraying anything, because the person that said it to me was fully aware and gave me permission to kind of mention it. But this was I found myself at a do, and I was talking to the permanent secretary at the Home Office. You may remember him, he was there for a long time. Now, that's an incredibly senior position. Some would even argue more senior than the Home Secretary themselves. You know everything, you're across it. And I said to him, he said, if only people knew how much time we spent in that office dealing with this. He said, it's non-stop. It's non-stop. There's thousands of people only dealing with this. And I said, what's the problem then? And he said, the French. And it wasn't some sort of smart, you know, xenophobic joke. He was serious. He said, the problem is with the French.
But also, and this is the crux of it, right? Before we had these crossings, what did you have? You had a camp at Sangatte. I think it was known as the Jungle.
That's right.
Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, correct.
You know, the French don't want that. Right? They don't want that. And of course, they've got, you know, Emmanuel Macron has his own political problems, because he's got the rise of a right-wing party coming up on his tails and I know we've seen Marine Le Pen obviously, you know, face court proceedings and so forth, but there is still discontent on the right in French politics that will make great hay if there is another Sangatte, because the French suddenly turn around and do us a favour, and they're not prepared. They are not prepared to do it,
100%.
and that's why we find ourselves where we are. They won't engage, and so then it becomes about, well, why are we giving them so much money? It's 700 million quid. And at the front page, I think it was the Daily Mail today, is, you know, can we have our money back, please? You know, that's what the Tories are saying. But it was the Tories who gave them the money.
But well, indeed. Are we going to see some, you know, incredible announcement that puts this to bed? Well, you know, is there going to be, the two sides have come to an agreement, they haven't revealed it yet, and everyone, Nigel Farage is going to go, oh my God, they've solved it.
No. But you know what? But you mentioned Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
Nigel Farage, his whole raison d'etre is because we have a crisis like this one.
Correct.
And it doesn't just affect what we see in Dover. You see these migrants being housed in hotels and houses of multiple occupancy right up and down the country, especially in poorer parts of the country, where those costs, hotel costs or rental costs, are much lower. It's not in the shishi suburbs of North London that you have these hotels. You know, they're trying to get value for the taxpayer, and communities are going, well, hang on a moment, you've cut my winter. This is what happened in Runcorn and Helsby. You cut my winter fuel allowance, but yet we've got 750 migrants in the constituency who are being put up at the expense of the taxpayer. And so, from Nigel Farage's point of view, a little bit like the French, he has there is, you know, the crisis works for him. It works for Reform UK. And when you had a government that actually took a much when you had the Boris Johnson government, and Boris Johnson has made this point fairly recently, that actually dealt with, our exit from the European Union and delivered on something that had been promised, namely the 2016 European Union referendum, that actually what happens is that Nigel Farage is basically made redundant. But of course, whilst this crisis continues to exist, and whilst we see hundreds of migrants, sometimes thousands of migrants crossing each week, Nigel Farage's stock can only go up.
Indeed. Let's move to this story, Theo. Number 10 in the Treasury refusing to rule out wealth tax. This has been around for years. The suggestion has been around. Nobody ever does it. And
why? There must be a reason.
There must be a reason. Well, I can only think it's interesting. This suggestion seems to be, and Neil Kinnock sort of waded in on this one. So the idea is with this particular, and there's lots of different versions of wealth tax, but this one suggests a 2% wealth tax on assets over 10 million quid could raise 11 billion pounds. Now,
who said Lord Kinnock?
He's raised this point. But we spoke to this group called Patriotic Millionaires last week who they want to pay more tax. In fact, you can voluntarily. There is, I can't remember the name of the form, but you can fill it out, send it off to the Treasury and put your figure in and give the money back. You're allowed to do that. I think the reason they picked assets and not wealth is because I don't think there's as many millionaires as people think in terms of earnings. But there's probably quite a lot of people in terms of owning property that collectively might be worth 10 million. The problem with that, of course, is you might own that property, but you might not have big income. So where do you get the tax from? So if you sell the property, then you cease to become one of the people that...
And then who would want to buy the property?
Well, exactly.
Because then they end up paying...
It comes with another big tax.
Look, I think what's quite instructive is that actually previously, and it was in Labour's manifesto before the election, Rachel Reeves was very clear, she wasn't going to introduce a wealth tax. But what we're seeing now is the rise on the left of the Labour Party. We saw the rebellion last week over welfare spending. Another rebellion in line to happen in the autumn over changes to EHCPs. Those are what, provide support for children with disabilities or learning difficulties. The left of the Labour Party is only gaining strength at the moment, and that's why Number 10 Prime Minister's spokesman, when he was asked about it yesterday, didn't rule out a wealth tax. Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, in effect Rachel Reeves' number 2, then goes in front of the House of Commons to answer an urgent question and repeatedly refuses to rule out a wealth tax, which he could quite easily do. But there's a real danger here, is that even if Labour doesn't introduce a wealth tax, those wealth creators, those people who invest in this country, who set up, build factories or offices or HQs in this country or buy properties in this country, decide to spend time in this country, over the summer start to think, actually, I don't want to be here any longer because in the autumn there's the possibility of a wealth tax, and I'm going to be subject to a huge, to seeing a significant amount of my my assets suddenly be handed over to the taxman. And all the while you see places like Milan, Italy, Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, has implemented a much more favourable regime for the very wealthiest. Basically a non-dom status. You see, I was speaking to somebody who's incredibly wealthy the other day, who was saying, a lot of the bankers are going to Milan now to make that there, to set up shop there, or at least have their base there. Dubai, of course, has always been very attractive for these people, and we want these people to come to the United Kingdom to make their home here. They go out, and Farage made this, and it was a valid point. They go to luxury restaurants, they pay VAT, so there's some consumption. If you start taxing wealth, people just alter their behaviour, and they'll just change their behaviour. You want to tax, and Lord Macpherson, who of course was Permanent Secretary in the Treasury, has made this point, you want to tax earnings and you want to tax consumption. That's the way you raise revenue, because ultimately the aim of the game is to put money into the Treasury's back pocket to spend on the things that we want to spend it on, not to scare the horses and get those people who pay the vast majority of tax in this country to get them running for the hills.
But there is there's another, just a final point on this. Some suggest, well, just make the top rate of tax, the very top rate, 50%, and then you end up in a situation which is kind of a full 5% over a certain threshold. I think there's two problems with that. One is the optics. The idea that you live in a country where the government takes half of your income is just not a good look for any government, even a Labour one.
But what you could do is 45p and a pound tax kicks in at 125 £50,000. You could reduce that threshold down to £70,000. You raise 12 billion quid, but that hits middle earners.
Of course,
it hits those. It doesn't hit. You think now, well, that will hit the very wealthiest, and yeah, £70,000, you know, but £70,000 is a deputy head teacher. It's a nursing manager. It's somebody who's been in, you know, it works in the public sector. It is not.
It's not people with an account in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, precisely. And they're not mobile, so they're not able to, you know, they're not able to suddenly up sticks and head off. So you will raise the money, but people are poorer.
Yeah. Lord Tebbit, let's just a final word on this, if we could, Theo. The Thatcher loyalists.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not really any other figure that has got such an association with the leader that they served with as Lord Tebbit. You mentioned Lord Tebbit, word association, Margaret Thatcher. You know, it's just there. He was a big beast. He said what he felt. He was satirised on Spitting Image, and many people say exactly what the Tories need now.
Yeah, very much so. I think they just don't make them like Lord Tebbit anymore, and you can agree with his politics or disagree with his politics, but you know, when you're thinking about Lord Tebbit, he was Margaret Thatcher's enforcer. He survived. His wife was paralysed from the neck down. It's very easy to just characterise him as this evil Tory baddie. He actually gave up his career 3 years after that happened to go and care for his wife Margaret, who was paralysed in the IRA bombing on the hotel in Brighton at the Tory Party conference. This was a multifaceted politician, a multifaceted human being who but had that knack of saying what he thought and had that, you know, that genuine white van man Tory, come from nothing, born in Enfield, was, you know, and hated, of course, by many within the media and the establishment. You know, he was dubbed by one sketch writer as the Chingford Strangler after his constituency. But this was a formidable politician who had a way of getting to the point. You know, if you think about, you don't like the question, it might make the question make you feel uncomfortable, but the Tebbit test of, you know, if you've come to this country to make this country your home, which cricket team do you support? It had that knack of just, he had that ability to just get to the point, and they don't. It's from another. You know, he's from another world, another era, but we don't have politicians like that anymore, I don't think.
No, I can't. I was trying to think of one earlier. Genuinely thought. I suppose some people would say, well, somebody like Nigel Farage, in terms of telling it like it is, might get close, at least with reform. Even if you fundamentally hate what they stand for, would never vote for them in a million years. You know what they stand for. That's the point.
And he had that. He wasn't lofty. He wasn't of the Eton Brigade of the Cameron Osborne likes.
No.
He was a grammar school boy who made good, and then saw the country and wanted to fix the country, and went to work and railed against many within his own party as the wets of you know, the 1970s and 80s. He wanted to make the country. He hated John Major, but you know, this was a man who wanted to make the you know, in Thatcher's vision, and we have, you know, sometimes it's difficult to define Starmerism. It's even harder to find somebody other than, of course, his chief of staff Morecambe McSweeney, who could actually define Starmerism. But you had with Norman Tebbit, everybody could define Thatcherism, and the embodiment of Thatcherism, not just in Margaret Thatcher, but in Norman Tebbit.
Indeed. Theo, we hit the clock, but thank you. Theo Ushwood with us here on the programme. Over to you next, 0344 499 1000.
The deal on the table at the moment is a terrible one. Terrible. It would have a 60-day ceasefire. Israel would get only 10 living hostages out of 20, so it keeps 10 trapped there. 18 bodies, another 12 bodies trapped there, and basically gives Hamas a seat at the table to negotiate what happens the day after. The deal that the Qataris are proposing basically allows Hamas to keep on to living and dead hostages as bargaining chips to try to survive the war that it started.
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, do these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Let's go to your calls and comments. This in from Jason Dudley says, Ian, the reason we haven't heard any breaking news from the Macron-Starmer thing is because Starmer is still thrashing out the details of how he's going to give France Jersey and Guernsey and how we can then rent it back for 400 billion quid a year. It's that would not surprise me. I've been thinking, Emmanuel agrees with me. Really? Yeah, really. That's where we're at. He's only been there a year. This is Trevor in Gloucester. What have you got for us, Trevor? Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
I'm just wondering about Keir Starmer's ability or inability to make a decision. If you consider his life to date has been all about taking the rules from somebody else. He's never made a rule in his life. Yeah. It's been about taking the rules, interpreting the rules, dealing with the rules. And I think making a decision makes him feel completely uncomfortable. This is why he wants to take decisions from Europe. He wants to take the rules from the WHO. He wants to take the rules from the UN. When he's told to give away the Chagos Islands, the only opposition he gives, he says he will give America a veto. He won't do it himself. He'll give it to someone else.
That's a very good point. Yeah, is that... I mean, some might go... You know, to be generous, and by the way, this is not my view, some might say, well, that is a way of working. Some people work better like that. But that also means to me that you're left with someone who has no idea of their own, frankly. And certainly they haven't got the kahunas to come up with a response or an answer.
He will, and it's also why he will never do anything for Britain, because it's always somebody else giving us the rules, never us. He's the person who gives us the rules for Britain, and he won't do it. So every decision he makes is going to give somebody else something that they want for nothing in return. It's just a ludicrous situation that we're in.
It's a completely ludicrous situation, isn't it? But, you know, that kind of internationalist, globalist way of doing things, it appeals to some people. I don't know, maybe in years to come, Trevor, in another life, we'll all discover we were wrong and they were right. But I can't see any evidence of that at the moment.
Yeah, but, I mean, if you just imagine one rule, for instance, that he could make if he wanted to, he could say, for the sake of the British people, legal aid is only being given to British people. Yeah. And then, you know, all of the people who are coming on boats, the lawyers would have to do it pro bono, or they would have to start a charity. And there's nothing wrong with starting a charity. No. The only difference is they would get their legal aid, but it wouldn't be paid for by the taxpayer, and he would be saving billions.
Yeah, but as you're right, it's not kind of in his... I mean, I'm sure they would cite the ECHR as a reason why you can't do that, but you're right. But even if it wasn't that, it's not in his blood, is it? It's not in his DNA to think that.
It's not, because he will not make a decision. No, he won't do it.
It's a great point. Love it. Trevor, thank you. Great call. Trevor in Gloucester. In fact, the more I think about this, I mean, I don't have... it's not that I have a respect for Blair, but his honesty on globalism is laid bare. He doesn't shy away from the fact that he sees this planet getting smaller, more intrinsically linked across all sorts of areas. He sees digital ID as part of a solution to make life better, his words, more streamlined. You might give up a bit of privacy, his words, but in return, you'll live in a better system where we can track the bad people, we can track all sorts of things. Now, you might say that that's nonsense, but he's brutally honest about it. I mean, Blair's never denied that kind of globalist credential, that he happens to genuinely believe that the world will work better like that. The danger with that, and it's so bloody dangerous that you can scarcely believe he's not called out on it often enough, is you end up with that whole thing, groupthink, which the most inept and destructive way of doing business is just to simply put a load of very similar people in a room to come up with the same conclusion with very few arguments against it. And that's kind of how it tends to work. You know, businesses, that's why they do well. Businesses do well at like the World Economic Forum, because it's essentially a powwow for businesses and leaders. Now, people who run businesses know much more about life than people who run governments. And people who run governments like to be in the company of people who run businesses. So millionaire one says to millionaire two, I think we need to get a common agreement on X, Y, Z. And they tell that to the politicians go, well, yeah, I mean, if he said it, he's James Dyson. He knows stuff. He's got a big house as well. So we'll do it. It's that kind of ineptitude which borders between insanity and danger. 0344 499 1000. Mark's in Lincolnshire. What have you got for us, Mark? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
Hi there, mate. Yeah, basically, I think kind of following on really from the last caller and what you've been saying yourself, Ian. Stam is very much a globalist with a little side twist of communism. I don't think we can forget that side of it either, because he's very much an authoritarian. He's far more interested in the seat he's going to get at the bigger table when he's done with us. That's hence why, you know, he's very much a manager than a leader. Everything he does points to that, you know, the Chagos deal, probably something going on with the Falklands in the background, no doubt. You know, all of these decisions he makes is all very much on a global scale. He's not really that interested in what happens in the UK, other than more from the authoritarian angle, if that makes sense. That's how it appears to me. But as far as immigration goes in itself, I mean, the only real option that we have to stop it, because I do understand that, you know, deporting some people, you know, from countries that they come from is going to be very tricky. It's going to be very difficult. However, therefore, the only thing you can really do is detain and deport, have that kind of policy, as Rupert Lowe would say. You know, use one of the islands off the shore, you know, offshore islands that we have.
I have no idea why that can't happen. Not every island that we run or own is across the other side of the world.
Exactly. We have plenty within our own British Isles.
And also, so that we retain the moral high ground on this, you know, we should make these places dignified and, you know, and kind. You know, we'll be kind. We don't want to be horrible to anybody. We don't want to beat anybody up. But we have a very strict and unrivaled immigration policy. I don't know why that would be weird to anybody.
100%, Ian. And what you do is, as you've said earlier anyway, you know, you offer them, you know, 3 meals a day, give them health checks, they get a relatively comfortable bed and tent and whatever else. You know, but we have a policy, you know, you'd have to make policy so that you're not able, so basically anybody that's entering illegally, you're not going to be able to claim asylum. And how you do this is, it's a detain and deport. So if you are going to stay here, whether that's 10 years or 15 years, you are going to stay here until either we can deport you or you choose to leave the country.
Or you choose to leave. And it needs exactly that. Listen, Mark, I have to step in just because we've got a couple of guests to cram in the next section. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mark in Lincolnshire. When I say cram in, I don't mean that unkindly, because we've got Fraser Myers and Ali Malani on with us, goodness sake. So no, there's no cramming needed for two big voices on that issue of Labour's plans for the definition of Islamophobia. Find out what both of them have to say next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We got loads to get through. Great comments coming through as well. You can message 87222 if you want to put a comment on anything we've talked about. The Voice of Doom, Day 15, I think it is. Day 16, man alive, is on its way in around about 10-15 minutes time. Stand by for that. More calls from you too if you want to put a voice note in and bypass the queues. 0344 499 1000. So let's move to this story. Labour's plans for Islamophobia, a definition of Islamophobia, sparking serious fears of censorship and special protections for one religion. It risks free speech and truthful reporting on Islamist extremism, it is claimed. In a moment, we'll speak to the national chairman of Labour, the Labour Muslim Network, Ali Malani, who's helped us out on this kind of stuff before. First, Fraser Myers, deputy editor of Spiked. Fraser, afternoon to you. This has been rumbling around for a while now. What's the latest on this? Where are we and what's the big fear?
So the latest is that the government has essentially called for a consultation on this. It wants various groups to feed into a definition. What's interesting is it's tend to ask mainly Muslim groups. It hasn't asked or invited any free speech groups, for instance, to take part in this discussion, even though the government claims it is aware that there are dangers to free speech and that it wants to get the balance right. The next phase, as well as this week, it will be there will be discussion with MPs and Lords in Parliament about where to go next with this definition.
The biggest criticism of this seems to be that you would end up with, there isn't a blasphemy law officially, but there is just one religion out there that does have a certain level of protection that other religions don't, or something like that, Fraser. Does that broadly appear to be the concern?
I think that's absolutely right. So any official definition, if it's adopted by the government, would be rolled out across the public sector, and we'd essentially have a kind of speech code against Islamophobia. Now, of course, you don't want officials in the government to hold prejudice towards Muslims and to say bigoted things. But the danger is when you're talking about Islam, that's a body of ideas. That's not a set of people. And in a free society, you should be allowed to criticise any set of ideas, and certainly religion. You know, people have fought very hard for criticise religion. The other danger is it's also not just the religion of Islam itself. So it looks likely that this definition will mirror an earlier definition that says that it is wrong to essentially criticise not just Muslims, but also Muslimness. And that's quite slippery, because it means then we're suddenly in the domain of where we can't criticise things that might be associated with Muslims, either rightly or wrongly, in the public mind. And if you look at this older definition from 2018, which seems certain to be replicated, and many of the same people are involved, it basically makes clear that you shouldn't say things like, you shouldn't talk about grooming gangs as having a particular prominence among Muslims, even though we know that there's a disproportion there. It says that historical facts like Islam subjugating people by the sword shouldn't be said, that could be racist. And of course, people will expect Islamist terrorism is talked about as as a stereotype and a trope, even though in reality, this is the biggest terror threat we face. And we need to be able to discuss those things openly, without fear or favour, without people fearing that they could lose their jobs or be accused of racism, because we've seen so many times in the past where that has actually led to serious problems down the line, whether it's the Manchester arena bombing, where a young security guard felt that he didn't want to say anything about a man with a giant rucksack because he would appear Islamophobic, to, of course, the grooming gang scandal, where the authorities were paralysed by a fear that they would appear racist. So we would think that we'd need to learn lessons from those scandals and not introduce new speech codes that will create a new climate of fear.
Is the problem, Fraser, and I just wonder this, that, and this probably gives the government too much credit, but is the thinking here that actually Muslims in this country have a very specific experience at the moment, and have done maybe for 10, 15 years in this country. It might have been the black population back in the 70s, but at the moment, when it comes, grooming gangs is one such contemporary example. We could talk clearly about political Islamism and terrorism, etc. Disproportionality. What would happen if you suddenly say, right, we don't have any laws around this? It would encourage people, as some suggested during the Supreme Court gender announcement, that instead of people just going, oh, that's cleared that up, then it meant a whole lot of people could go, right, I can be really vile now to people who think they're born into the wrong body. Something like that might happen here. Is that what the government are thinking? Are they like just guarding themselves in case there's some kind of a horrendous onslaught against one group of people?
Yeah, I think there is obviously bigotry against Muslims in society, and you can understand that people would have entirely noble reasons for wanting to push back against that. I think there are also some less noble motives coming from some groups who do simply want to shield criticism of Islam, criticism of their faith, criticism even of extreme Islamic practices, and they will be able to use essentially this definition for their benefit. So I actually don't doubt that Labour is sincere in wanting to challenge bigotry and hatred, but it's the way that it's going about it. It's going to create huge problems for free speech, and it's going to prevent the vital discussions that we need about some very serious challenges in society.
Listen, Fraser, great to have you on again. Thank you very much, Fraser Myers. He's Deputy Editor over there at Spiked. Ali Milani waiting and listening to that, National Chairman of the Labour Muslims Network. Ali, good afternoon to you, sir. You were hearing what Fraser said there. Just pick up from where he left off, if you like. Nice to have you with us, by the way.
Ian, thank you so much for having me on. It's good to join you. Listen, I think Fraser's done a remarkable job. I've never heard so many myths, truths, and misconceptions and distortions of the truth all in one 3-minute segment. So I take my hat off to him. It's quite impressive. First of all, let me make a couple of things clear for your listeners. It is absolutely not the intention of anybody involved, as that I have spoken to within the Muslim community, to introduce a blasphemy law or to outlaw criticisms of Islam. That's not what's happening here whatsoever. That's not the objective behind an Islamophobia definition. And very different to what Fraser has just said, the previous definition did not mean that you can't criticize Islam or even perceived Muslimness. That's absolute nonsense. In fact, all I would do is ask your listeners who have just heard what Fraser has said, which isn't true, to just go and read the previous APPG definition. What we are looking at doing is, look, don't listen to me. According to the Home Office's own data, violent and non-violent hate crime towards Muslims is the largest proportion of religiously motivated hate crime anywhere in the UK. And so in order for the government and various departments to deal with that kind of extremist hate towards Muslims, you have to define it. In the same way, I mean, look, I would suspect a lot of the criticisms of the Islamophobia definition aren't, will never and have never been levied towards definitions of anti-Semitism, for example, and other forms of bigotry. So all the objective here is to have a unified definition around the racism that Muslims experience according to the Home Office's own data.
But is that not always, Ali, going to be a grey area? Just by definition, whether something is racist or whether it's satirical. I'm thinking, for some reason it went through my head there of Boris Johnson and the letterbox comment that he wrote years ago in The Telegraph. That was seen as being very unkind and unnecessary. He would have argued that if you read any of his columns, they all kind of did similar things in different ways. That's the sort of way he wrote. Would that be seen as blasphemous, or would that be seen as Islamophobic, I should say, if you were to say that, you got women walking around in these things looking a bit like letterboxes? Should I be allowed to say that?
Okay, so I'm glad you corrected the blasphemous and Islamophobia, because we're not in any way walking towards a blasphemy law. What you've picked up is true. There will be grey areas, and that's why a definition is important, because there needs to be a benchmark for government and the various departments to measure it against. And this is, again, where Fraser is absolutely wrong, and it's not true, saying that it's only Muslims that have been involved in the evidence-gathering sessions and giving advice to this group. The public consultation is open to anybody. Fraser could right now log on to the public consultation and provide his view or Spike's view on what this definition should look like. And that's what this conversation is all about. You're right. There'll be grey areas. We do not want to infringe on free speech. That is absolutely not the intention. That's why we're having a conversation around a definition and what it should look like. Now, on the specific example of Boris Johnson, I don't know if that would fall into Islamophobia. I mean, I have different critiques of Boris Johnson's writing. I mean, it's not good to begin with, and I think that particular example was unhelpful. And let me explain why. In the immediacy of Boris Johnson's comments around letterboxes and other things, we saw an enormous spike in religiously motivated hate crime towards Muslims, including Muslim women.
Did we really? I heard a colleague of mine say that the other day, and I just couldn't imagine a load of sort of octogenarian Telegraph readers rolling up their newspapers, running around the streets going, well, I've just heard what Boris said. I mean, for those of them who can walk, for goodness sake, I mean, we sort of hear that example. Whenever somebody says something contentious, it's like, oh, we saw a rise in it. I mean, it's said anecdotally. Is there any real proof of that?
Yeah, there was about a 500% increase.
So Boris's comment on that provoked a 500%.
Oh, no, we can't. Look, there was a 500% increase around that time. Now, can we directly link it to Boris Johnson's comments? I believe when politicians say things that are inflammatory, and look, I have my own belief that there are politicians in this country who are committed to blaming people that look, sound, and kind of primarily look different to us, to distract from the principal problems this country has. And it's a very lazy and dangerous form of politics where they don't have an answer to our problems. And so they want your listeners to hate Muslims, to hate black and brown people, because that's a distraction to the principal problems our country has. But can we link it directly to Boris's comments? No, there's no evidence to suggest that. But we also are clear that when politicians say things like this in public, then it emboldens a level of racism in our society, and the data suggests that. But one of the things, Ian, and I'm really pleased and grateful that you've had me on the show to be able to tell your listeners, from the Muslim community, and I have spoken to hundreds of Muslim organizations and leaders around the country, not a single instance have I heard any of these organizations or Muslim individuals looking to introduce blasphemy laws or to outlaw the criticisms of Islam. What we're looking at is a definition that gives Muslims the same rights Jewish people have, black people have, women have, for example, when it comes to misogyny, and that's to define their own experiences of racism and give the government a definition to work towards and to work with.
Is there always going to be, I mean, look, when people talk about religion of any type, you sort of kind of slightly end up in Monty Python territory. You know, I made a comment about going to a big church recently, and the vicar that was doing the ceremony, you know, I had the best dress in the congregation. So that was a sort of I don't know if that was a letterbox comment, but about a Christian man who looked he was wearing a dress. I don't know. But the fact is, we will always look at, you know, any area that has cultural differences will always be ripe for satire, if nothing else, or parody. So that in itself is, I suppose, the grey area, isn't it? You know, what is, you know, you could make a comment about a burqa or a vicar's dress, etc. You could do that satirically. You could do that within the confines of, you know, trying to make a wider observation. It's funny, isn't it? It's the 21st century. You've got people walking around with their face covered up. You know, I think you should be allowed to say that.
Look, satire is a historic part of British tradition and comedy and culture. And again, it's not in the intention of any of us working on a definition to stamp down on that. But what you can't do, for example, is attack Muslims or on their Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. This is where it's important that we recognize the racism that's involved in the kind of bigotry and hatred that Muslims experience in this country. I'll give you an example. If I or anyone on the street gets approached and gets called a terrorist, for example, which is a common slur that Muslims experience in the public, no, not once have I heard the person doing this, first of all, stopping you, asking you, are you Muslim? Have you Shahada? And then proceeding to racially abuse you. They do it based on what you look like and your perceived Muslimness. That is why the very first person who died as a result of an Islamophobic attack after 9/11 was a Sikh man, because there was a perception that he was Muslim. And so there is a huge element of racism that underpinned this. And that's why Fraser so wrongly and completely distorted the previous definition around Muslimness and perceived Muslimness, because it is so often the color of your skin, the way you sound, and the way that you look, why you receive that level of hatred. So no, it's not so much going after satire and that sort of thing. But what you can't do, for example, as a Muslim politician in this country, you can't just associate me, for example, with terrorism or grooming gangs or what's going on in Iran or Afghanistan and Iraq. That would be racism, and that's what the definition would cover.
I get that, and for what it's worth, just to throw this in, you mentioned the Sikh guy. A friend of mine who happens to be just a slightly dark, sort of your coloured skin, white man, who's been called the P word more times than he can remember, on the basis that he looks a little bit brown, which is, you know, again, that moves into the dark territory that you're referring to. And if you're walking around and you are obviously, in this case, Muslim, and people are shouting that out, which is not, you know, only likely to be an inaccuracy, it could be all sorts of, you know, and clearly demonstrably racist and offensive. But that is already illegal, that stuff, isn't it? So you don't need any new laws to cover that. So if, you know, somebody shouts that word at you, that's an arrestable offence.
Yeah, and so the definition is actually about it's actually about the conversation we've been having. It's about this grey area. It's to give departments and government what is and isn't, because a lot of times we're asking people who don't directly experience Islamophobia to define it and to help measure complaints against it. We need to give something to support them on that, and that's all this consultation and process is. Hopefully, we reach an end point where we have a proper Islamophobia definition, where the term Islamophobia is used and the racism that underpins it is recognised, and then we can all move on. And that's all Muslims are asking for. And this is where Fraser doesn't get it and others don't get it. All right. Muslims simply asking to define their own experiences of racism the same way other communities are.
Ali, thank you very much as ever. Ali Milani, National Chair of the Labour Muslim Network. Thank you to him. You could just stick with the racism rules that are in place. I would imagine it's deeply unpleasant if somebody picks up on what you're wearing or, you know, your skin colour, etc. I've mentioned the story before of the guy that, in fact, this goes back to the old TalkSport days, who had the experience of, and somebody we used to work with back then, had regularly experienced being called the P word, And he's not mixed race. He's just a white bloke with a more olive, darker skin. And there's nothing in his family tree that puts him that. So he has experienced that. But that's surely, I say just, not to underplay it, because, you know, it's not pleasant to happen, not pleasant for him, not pleasant for anybody. But that's racism, right? We already have a law on that. Do you need a specific one on Islamophobia? 0344 499 1000. We've got the voice of doom coming next.
I suffer from anxiety. Everyone suffers from anxiety. Why do 32,000 people have a free car? This one, constipation. Now, I can understand you might need to get somewhere quickly if you have the reverse of that particular syndrome. You might not want to be hanging around and waiting at a bus stop if you've got to hot-foot it to a bathroom. But if you've got constipation, it doesn't seem as much of a pressing concern. Depressive disorder, elbow disorders, obesity. If you're obese, I recommend you start walking a bit more.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. So, Voice of Doom Day 16. I'm reliably informed. 16 days this has gone on. Voice of Mystery Voice. All you got to do is tell me who this is.
I can't guarantee that.
It's quite tricky. You are looking for a former Conservative cabinet minister. Oh, that's a big clue. Well, it's a big clue as in it narrows it down. It is not Michael Howard. We keep getting Michael Howard. It's not Boris Johnson. Doesn't sound like Boris. It's not David Cameron, all right? It's none of those. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
Who's that then? If you think you know, 87222, don't bother phoning. Just message if you fancy having a crack at it. We'll give you the answer. Only if we get a correct one on the other side of the news. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
Finn is saying we should go for a further clue. All right. Finn's our producer, by the way. He's not alive anymore. So it's a dead Tory, basically, you're looking for. I don't say that unkindly. Former cabinet minister. Here it is again.
I can't guarantee that.
If you think you know, then 87222. Or go to the Dead Tory Facebook page, where I'm sure there's a big old list. Joan is in Sunderland. Joan, how are you doing? Back to Islamophobia. What are your thoughts on what you've been hearing?
Oh, hello. I'm 85-year-old, and quite honestly, I hardly recognise my own country now. I'm also a Christian, and I really, really cannot understand why one particular religion is protected, is my word, against all the others. It's just ridiculous. I mean, you've got teachers who are in hiding because of death threats. You've got people apologising, police chiefs sitting in a line where someone's done something or knocked a Quran off.
Oh, the little kid at school who knocked the Quran. Remember that one, Joan? And you know, suddenly there was a convening of all these people. The imam was there, the chief of police, the counsellor, the teacher, the poor mother who's begging for her child not to be beheaded or something.
Yes, and I cannot understand why one particular religion. We have lots. We've got the Christian Church, which has got the Catholics, we've got Methodists, we've got United Reform, we've got Quakers in that group, we've got Buddhists, we've got Sikhs.
Would it be fair, Joan? Sorry to chip in. And I know we've only got about 30 seconds here, but would it be fair to say that Muslims at the moment have a heightened, disproportionate amount of abuse from any of those other groups?
No.
Okay. So they need no additional kind of consideration when it comes to protection.
I can't understand why they get special treatment, and I don't think I will be alone when I say this.
I think you...
From the police and from judiciary.
There it is. Thank you very much indeed. Joan, I under some powerful points there. I get it as well. Doesn't recognise her country anymore. Thank you to you, Joan. You take care. Have a lovely afternoon. I hope it's still sunny in Sunderland. Here's the voice of doom.
I can't guarantee that.
Let's hear that again.
I can't guarantee that.
Who's that then? If you think you know, 87222. Hopefully we get a correct answer. I'll tell you on the other side of the news at 2.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. So Emmanuel Macron is here. He's on terra firma. He's on UK soil, along with his wife, Brigitte, visiting the UK. A lot of criticism going on over France's failure, of course, to tackle illegal channel crossings, despite us giving them £771 million in funding. Labour's scrapping of the Rwanda policy and a push for the controversial one-in, one-out migrant deal risks encouraging the crossings. We're in a right old mess on this. But on this one occasion, given that the French president is over here, are you at any level trusting the French to come good on immigration? Details to come. The £600 million mobility scheme, which aids 590,000 disabled people, is facing criticism for misuse and waste. It's prompted calls for a stricter oversight, but remaining essential for those with genuine needs. I would up the amount of money those with genuine needs get. I have no truck with doing that as a taxpayer. It's the areas around the edges that seem to be the problem. Our resident doctors in England have voted to strike. Can you believe it? Demanding a 29.2% pay rise to restore wages to 2008 levels, claiming the government's 5.4 increase fails to address historical pay freezes. Would you support the, used to be called junior doctors, now resident doctors? Any support on that? Lines are open, 0344 499 1000. This in from Simon in good old Paddock Wood, who says the word Islamophobia is a misnomer. Anti-Muslim hatred should be what they are calling it. Yes, and I don't have a problem with somebody being prosecuted who's been horrendous, hateful, violent and abusive to somebody because of their faith. That's not how a democracy works. I don't give a hoot what faith it is. That should not be the case at all. I don't necessarily think you need another law around one particular religion, whilst understanding that that particular faith is probably disproportionately collaring more stick in the streets, if you like, than the average person. Right, have we got a winner on The Voice of Doom? Have we got a winner on The Voice of Doom? Have a listen to The Voice.
I can't guarantee that.
Who do you think that is? We asked earlier on, or gave you the clue, that it was somebody who's no longer alive. They are a former Conservative cabinet minister. These are some of the guesses. Lord Daniel Moylan, who's not dead, he's 69. He's a spring chicken, frankly. Alan Clark, it is not. Good guess. Paddy Ashdown, well, kind of all right, but he was never a Tory. Cecil Parkinson, it is not. Willie Whitelaw, no. Douglas Hurd, still alive at 95, not dead. Gerald Kaufman was a Labour Secretary of State and is dead, I think. Nigel Lawson. I think Nigel Lawson, did he die recently? Fairly recently? I hope I haven't killed him off. 2023. Nigella's dad, of course. Did you know that, Finn? There you go. Sir Francis Pym, it is not. We don't have a winner. It rolls over to tomorrow, of course, and we'll discover then whether somebody gets it. There's a whole ton of clues we've thrown in there now. Let's move to this story, the £600 million mobility scheme. I mean, we've got an awful lot of question marks around this. And, of course, nobody disputes that if you take a mobility car as, I think it comes as kind of an option, as distinct from cash. You can get a mobility allowance. The question is, who gets the cars? Now, we're hearing stories that people with constipation are being... Believe me, the only person you don't want to give a brand new car to is somebody with constipation, I promise you. Tennis elbow is another one. And all other bizarre ailments, netting Brits brand new cars under what is seen as a corrupted scheme. Let's speak with Elliot Keck, Head of Campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. To coin the phrase, Elliot, this is bonkers and out of control.
Good afternoon, Ian. Was a once pretty uncontroversial scheme, Motability, basically set up so that people with very severe disabilities, who in particular needed maybe modifications to their car to enable them to drive it, could get access to basically benefit payments and a scheme that they could trade that benefit payments for to allow them to get around. And what it's morphed into is something incredibly disfigured that I think actually does a disservice to people with very serious problems, because now there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people claiming it for things like ADHD, anxiety and depression, alcohol misuse, obesity, and it's these conditions, the conditions that arguably people shouldn't be receiving free cars for, that are seeing the biggest increases. So the very serious conditions that a lot of people are afflicted with that do prevent people from getting around, of which they aren't responsible for, something like cerebral palsy, are seeing much smaller increases.
Yes, and this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because I was always under the assumption, as I said at the beginning, Elliot, that you kind of took the mobility option as distinct from taking additional money. So you surrendered one to get the other.
Yeah, that's right.
I also assumed that the criteria around it would be obviously quite, well, stringent.
Yeah, and I think it did used to be, but now 9 in 10 cars under the Motability scheme have no modifications whatsoever. I think that's a slightly alarming statistic. The number of people that are using Motability has increased, I think it's tripled since before the pandemic. The total number of people receiving enhanced mobility PIP, which is the benefit you can use for Motability, although you don't have to, has doubled since before the pandemic. And you just have to take a look at the conditions that, as I said, have seen the biggest increases. The number of people receiving enhanced mobility PIP, i.e. eligible for Motability with sleep apnea, has increased 5-fold. The number for drug misuse has increased, I think, 8-fold. The number of people for anxiety and depression has increased 5-fold. Whereas, as I said, the very serious conditions I think people absolutely genuinely sympathise with and believe that people should receive Motability vehicles for, they've seen much, much smaller increases. So it's clear that people are broadly cottoned on to the fact that if they play the system, if they know how to answer the right questions and in what order, they can get access to a free taxpayer-funded car. Wow. And unsurprisingly, they're doing exactly that.
I mean, do we know, Elliot, what percentage, if you like, of the 589,000 people should not be claiming?
Well, it's difficult to measure that. I think the way that we need to measure, and the way that we're looking at the Taxpayers Alliance, is you take the conditions which, bluntly can't be faked. So, very serious disabling conditions that can't be faked. You take a look at the natural increase in those conditions, and most of them are seeing a natural increase. And then you look at that increase. So let's say maybe it's increased by 20%, 30%, 40%, and then you take a condition that can be faked, or at the very least can be exaggerated, like anxiety and depression, and you see a increase of 500%. And you can assume that all conditions should be increasing at roughly the same amount. And I think you can look at it that way. So that's one way that we're going to be looking at over the coming weeks and months. Clearly, there has been a natural increase in the number of people that should be eligible for this. We are getting sicker as a society, we are getting older, and we're increasing in number as a society. But some of those conditions where we're seeing these shocking spikes, these almost hockey stick spikes, they're the ones where I think we need to be clamping down on.
Are the government listening to this? Are they aware? Is the DWP, Liz Kendall and others, are they au fait across this one?
Well, they seem to be when they brought in proposed the reforms that were discussed and debated on last week. The problem is Labour MPs, their backbenchers, completely have their heads in the sand. They don't think any of this is a problem, and so as a result, they force the government to back down. So I think many in government are aware in principle, and maybe even know some of the detail, but unfortunately they don't have either the political will or the political power to do anything about it.
Listen, great to have you on with us as ever, Elliot. Thank you. Interesting one, this. That is Elliot Keck, by the way. He is head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you to him. Over to you. The difficulty is with all of this is you don't want to go too kind of anecdotal, because everyone goes, well, there's a fella who lives around the corner from me, don't think he's got anything wrong with him, got a brand new BMW. We don't know what the evidence is around that. My real first on this is to know literally what percentage of the 589,000 disabled individuals should not be getting it. And the reason I ask that is because if it's 1%, the government response will be something like, well, that's not enough to, it will cost more, so it's not enough people to create a problem. Well, 1% of 589,000 is 5,890 if I've done my maths correct. I would say if you're giving a car to 5,890 people that aren't entitled to one, that's a big issue and must cost a lot of money. It can't be. So is it less than 1%? So if it's less than 1%, let's say it's 0.5%. So that's still 3,000 people getting a car that shouldn't get it. Is it a quarter of? It's still 1,500. I don't know what it is. Is it 10%? In which case, we really are on big numbers. Thoughts on that one? This comes from Steve in Cambridge about doctors' strike action. I'm in favour of any strike action that gives this horrendous government problems. They deserve that and much more. Well, remember how they talked before they were the government about, you know, we will restore faith, we will give people all the money they deserve, etc. Loads of money floating around, and they've splashed it all up the wall. You know that £22 billion black hole that they kept banging on about? That included the pay rises they gave to certain sectors. Lou in Somerset says the mobility car is a Ponzi scheme to shift EVs. It's a good point, actually. Never even thought of that. Colin in Cranley, which is in Surrey, says we've been ruled by the EU for so long now we don't know how to govern our own country. It's a fair point. Georgina is down in London. What do you got for us, Georgina? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, darling. Well, I'm ringing in about Macron coming over and the problem we have with migration. No doubt we are paying for Macron's visit, and I'm sure he won't be skimping on anything while he's over here, so that's going to cost us a pretty penny as well. Maybe Starmer will ask Macron what he's been spending it's nearly it's 771 million, is it, on keeping the migrants from coming over?
Yeah, very well spent money, Georgina, don't you think?
Well, I think that would be better spent on our own, to be honest, because he's done sweet Fanny Adams to earn that money. And the people that are coming over, Ian, they're not war-torn refugees fleeing battling countries. The vast majority of these illegals are fighting-age males who'll be coming over here and getting a job with Just Eat or Deliveroo. You know, there comes a time when you have to be cruel to be kind. We've already have allowed over 50,000 plus that we know of economic migrants, because that's what they are, onto the shores of our country. We need to start talking about repatriation. You know, not a one-in, one-out policy. That's not going to work. This is farcical and defeats the object of decreasing the numbers of migrants. You know, we now need to send all migrants coming over in boats or in the back of lorries back to France immediately with no exceptions. I mean, you've got men with children on the shoulders. Those children probably don't even belong to those men. They're just using those kiddies as tools to get over here. Yeah. Maybe Macron will take some of these migrants back with him when he leaves our country to go back to France. We can only hope, can't we?
Well, you never know. Maybe, I mean, that old presidential cavalcade, and there's a big aeroplane they came. I don't think they came by EasyJet, so you'd imagine there's a bit of space, Georgina.
Well, I would like to think so.
To show some willing and nothing else.
Well, they're all screaming about global warming and carbon emissions, but it's not stopping any of them from going all over everywhere in the private jets. You know, seriously, Ian, this is getting beyond a joke now. I'm so sick and tired with the whole blinking lot of it.
Yeah, well, you're bang on. Listen, Georgina, always a good call. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get an issue on the French. It's a voice note from Gary.
The only French that would come good is the fishermen. If we turn around and say for every migrant that comes over, there'll be a month of the fishing rights taken away from them, the French fishermen will get involved and they'll stop them coming, that's for sure. Bye.
There it is. Straightforward stuff. Thank you very much indeed for that, Gary. Here's another from Phil on Keir Starmer. That's the rap version. Let's get the other version.
Ian, that Starmer is such a snake. It's all about the optics, right? He's making it look as if the problem is solved without solving the problem. What a snake.
Yeah. What a snake. There it is. Have you ever known a Prime Minister so derided as this one? And I keep wondering, I think this about so many subjects, because we live in a world now where this era that we're in, I'm talking about the last sort of 10 years in particular, will sort of be the era of analysis. We analyse everything to death. We argue everything to death. We have so many forums and formats and places to argue, and then everybody puts in there. So we've got this kind of black and white thinking. We've got polarity. We've got night is day, day is night. Things are upside down. But we've never, ever analysed like we do now. So is Starmer any different to Cameron? For goodness sake, you know, Cameron, I know it's not the best example. Or is it because we incessantly talk about him and I'm not saying we overthink it, but do we overanalyze it? Because, you know, if you ask most people, any politician, any day of the week, if they're a bit shizzle, most people will go, yeah, of course they are. They're rubbish. Get them out. That's just a standard response from the electorate, even in the good times. Is it that, or is it just the fact that Keir Starmer really is numero uno when it comes to numptiness, ineptitude and surplus to requirements in our lives? 0344 499 1000. We're back with more comment from you coming next.
So the overly monitoring and legalising the relationships between people in the workplace because of things that people say. And they will say, Angela Rayner and this government, well, it's not really about free speech, it's explicitly about harassment. But of course, when you start saying a woman is a woman, or you believe in other things and you say those things, people then say, well, words are violence and that's distressing and harmful and that's harassment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 21 minutes after 3 o'clock. Derek says, 1 in, 1 out. Farage in, Starmer out. There you go. There's a very simple way to do it, says Derek. Thank you very much. This one from Mike in Colchester. Reference mobility cars, most modern cars have a serviceable life of at least 10 years. Why can't mobility cars be taken from the very large pool of 3-year-old ex-lease vehicles, give them a new lease of life, sorry, no pun intended. Given that this government is obsessed with net zero, surely this would be a green option too. Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be the supreme recycling, wouldn't it? Let's have a look and get a brief word as well on what's going on with junior doctors. Despite being awarded a 22% pay increase over the last 2 years, resident doctors, not junior doctors, in England have once again voted in favour of more strike action. Let's listen to Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust chairman, on this issue. Roy, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
It seems like, just to put it in a very obvious terms, it seems like an awful big ask to me.
Well, it is. I mean, for Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State for Health, it's an absolute nightmare for him because obviously they haven't got any money. We know the state the government's in. I don't know what he's going to do. As far as the NHS is concerned, it'll be a nightmare to have to go through all the strikes again. The NHS is now undergoing a huge reorganisation, which is very disruptive, and in the new 10-year plan and all that. And the strikes on top of that is going to completely disrupt waiting lists that they're struggling with. And of course, for patients, it's all of the uncertainties again of, am I going to get my operation? When can I get in and get it done? So it's a nightmare all around. I mean, Streeting, he's going to have to sit down. I mean, I hope he's not going to do what his predecessor said, I'm not going to talk to them, they should go back to work. He's going to have to sit around a table and talk to them. What he's going to give them, I don't know. I mean, I did say when they had their strike before, when it was settled, they settled for a 2-year deal. And I said I thought that wouldn't wash. I thought it was a 3-year deal. They could have staged in a 3rd-year increase and known what the cost of it would be. And I think the junior doctors or the house doctors would have been ready to settle for that, and we would have had a bit of peace. So this I've always thought this 3rd year was the dangerous year when things might kick off again, and it has. I mean, the voting, it's well over 50%, and it's 90% have voted for a strike. So, we're back into some very, very difficult territory.
Yeah, and you wonder if this is their starting point to ask for a pay rise of this magnitude, and of course they've experienced a pay rise already. Even if they were to negotiate down and ended up asking for 10%, I can't, because they've already said that 5.4% is a kick in the teeth, then you're still going to end up with a complete cul-de-sac of a dilemma, because the government's not going to agree to that either.
Yes, you're right. And let's not forget that the nurses now are consulting on whether they should consult on industrial action for another pay rise. So, the nurses could kick off as well. Last time, we narrowly escaped, by coincidence of timing, we narrowly escaped having the nurses and the doctors on strike at the same time. This time round, I think they'll plan it a bit differently. So there's a huge risk here. And this is the biggest challenge that Wes Streeting has faced since he's been Secretary of State for Health. And dare I say it, he's likely to be in his career as a politician. He has to sort this out.
Yeah.
How he's going to do it, the Rachel Reeves, I have no idea.
Yeah, and what are your options when you're in that place? I mean, I appreciate you're not a union negotiator, Roy, that's not your area, but you just wonder on a human level, when one side is asking for this amount from the side that has no money and has already given what some people would say was a pretty good pay rise, then it's hard to even imagine where the compromise lies.
It is. I mean, you have to sit down and talk, even if you're talking about talking, even if you've got nothing to talk about, you have to talk. So I'd sit down with them, I'd say, listen, guys, you can see the situation that we're in with the economy. The pay review bodies will probably give you, 2.5%, 3% this year. We will certainly go with whatever the pay review bodies give you. But and then let's look at working conditions. Let's work at canteens being open 24/7 in hospital. Let's look at rotas. Let's look at, how we send you around the country for your training. I mean, there's a lot of the what I would call the softer stuff that we could do. I mean, there's something we could do with I don't know, junior doctors' mortgages or something. You know, you have to kind of think creatively, a creche facility in hospitals, that kind of stuff, to try and make the job a bit easier. But Streeting is going to have to talk to them, and he's going to have to start pretty soon, I think.
Yeah, I sense so. Roy, thank you as ever. That is Roy Lilly, former NHS Trust chairman, with his thoughts on what is happening over there at Doctors Strike HQ. This is going to be an absolute nightmare for the government. I know some people enjoy the car crash, but I don't enjoy seeing people's appointments or procedures meddled with, cancelled, postponed, put to the back of the you know, we're talking health here. We already have a crisis in so many other areas. But what is the answer? How do you find, you know, if you had the kind of ACAS boys in, what would they come up with? Back to your calls. This one on Doctor Strikes. Norman is in Dartford. Norman, you're a sensible man. Can you solve the problem?
Well, you're going to be surprised, Ian.
Go on.
But I'm sitting here with a smile on my face. As an ex-FOC in the print,
yeah.
I predicted this last year.
Okay.
When Wes Streeting was walking around trying to persuade everybody it was God's gift of negotiation, I told everybody they'll be back next year, the doctors, and the next time, and the next one will be Mick Whelan and Aslif. They're all lined up. He lined them up last year, giving them a 3-year deal that most people didn't understand.
True.
But the 3-year deal was backdated for 2 years.
Yeah.
22% for nothing.
Wow.
Nothing asked for. And this has been so predictable. But of course, this government, they're all so wet behind the ears. It's incredible.
Well, we know that much. How do they solve it, though, Norman? What's the, you know, what can Wes Streeting say to these doctors? They're standing there in front of him saying, Mr. Streeting, we require a 22%, a 20-odd% pay increase, despite the fact that they've had a pay increase over 3 years, but, you know, they're asking for more. What's his options?
Well, he hasn't. The point was he done himself in last year. You see, because what they're going to think? They're going to think if we keep on, we'll get the 29%.
Yeah.
They think that. I mean, I don't want to see them go on strike. It's just that the way they've gone about things, it's so predictable.
Sure.
You know, and he's got to talk to them and try to persuade them somehow that what he can afford to pay them. But this was laid last year.
Yeah, you kind of wonder, don't you, where this can go, other than absolute carnage.
I'll be honest. If I'd have been junior doctor sitting there last year, I'd have thought, blimey, mate, you'll do for me, son. I really would have done. I'll be honest with you. I was 22 years at it, negotiating with governors, and I couldn't. Well, last year I thought you must be the biggest mug in the world, and sure enough, he was, and he's proved it.
There it is. We will wait and see. Thank you.
I don't know who they took advice from.
You kind of wonder. You kind of wonder, don't you? If
to be honest, Ian.
I mean, the government has said, look, you were ordered a 28.9%, you know, just shy of 30% pay rise over 3 years, and that would be enough. And they're sort of arguing, no, we want some more, because they say they're seeking restoration of pay, which they still argue is a 20% real terms pay cut since 2008.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, you can go.
You can play that game all day, though, can't you? Can't everybody play that game? I mean, I don't know if you're entitled to always say, well, you know, cost of living's gone up and inflation has changed, etc. I mean, I don't know whether. I think we could probably all argue to a degree of a pay cut if you analyse that.
Well, I've never come across anything like it in the 20-odd years I was negotiating.
Well, there you go.
I've never known a governor.
Yeah, I'd imagine you were a tough old rascal, Norman, in your days.
You learn from experience, Ian.
You certainly do. Great call, Norman. Thank you. Always nice to talk. That's Norman in Dartford. We're going to move to a very different territory. Does anyone listening to this own an exotic pet? Yeah, when I say exotic pet, I don't just mean, you know, a bird-eating spider, maybe the occasional tarantula or something like that. Possibly a handsome kookaburra. I'm talking here, you know, your big old snakes, tigers, that kind of malarkey. We're going to speak to one man who knows all about this, because there's lots to be said inside the exotic animal trade. Details coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 to 4, it is Talk. Have a listen to this. Figures have shown that there are 2,700 dangerous animals which require a licence to be kept, are being kept as pets in the UK. These numbers include a dozen lions, 11 pumas, 16 different types of crocodile, over 70 rattlesnakes. The list goes on. Let's speak to a responsible owner of what you might call exotic animals, or certainly unusual ones. Rhys Oliver is a conservationist who houses exotic animals. Joins us now. Rhys, good afternoon to you.
How are you? Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I was really hoping you'd have a orangutan on your shoulder or something as we spoke during this, but no such luck. So listen, I mean, there's a... If I divide it up like this, tell me if this is fair. There are legit owners of exotic pets, and there are those that do it through, perhaps, shall we say, a darker avenue, that are not licensed and don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's like in all industries, there's people that are under the radar and under the carpet, and who actually, people like us who are doing it properly, bring us down and give us a bad name. So of course there is, but yeah, I mean, what we do here is very above board, and we do it for the welfare of the animal, and we've got all the public safety measures in place to make it safe for the animal and for the public.
Tell us what you have, Rhys.
So currently in my facility, I've got 4 lions, puma, lemurs, monkeys, tapir, capybara, penguins. Most of them are rescue animals. We've got lions that came from a circus, animals that came from the illegal pet trade, neglect, things like that. So what we do is mainly rescue animals, breed, rewild if we can. We all do it all towards conservation.
And I should point out, you don't live in a one-bedroom flat.
No, I don't.
That would be well. That's another issue. It's surprising how many people do live in completely inappropriate circumstances and still think it's okay to own something that requires quite obviously more space. So you have the space, you have the land to facilitate this. I mean, you mentioned lions. I mean, this is an obvious kind of slightly schoolboy question. I mean, are you friends with the lions? I mean, can you go in there with them?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a great relationship with two of them. Two of them came from a circus. They were 2 days old. The circus has been shut down, so we took them on. They would have been, if I hadn't have taken them, they would have been euthanized. There isn't enough zoo facilities that can take these animals because of the cost of keeping them and the space required. So I took them, and that's basically what I've done with a lot of my animals. Yeah. But what I would say is, you know, there is a lot of people keeping like what they call finger monkeys, sort of marmosets and type of animals in like aviaries in the house or bird cages, but now in 2026 in April, there is a new act called the Primate Act, which basically will eliminate all those people because there is now set standards for every single primate species. Yeah. So anyone who's keeping like a little marmoset in a little parrot cage, they won't be able to do that. So it will force them to build correct facilities, or they'll have to be rehomed.
You kind of think, Rhys, and maybe I'm just being slightly naive, but you would, you know, if you're sitting there in your living room and you've got a bird cage with a marmoset in it, you might think that it's, you wouldn't need loads of experience of looking after a wild animal to know that that's not right. But there are clearly a percentage of people that don't clock that.
Yeah, there is, and unfortunately social media and things that people do online, they contribute to things like that, and I think a lot of people want these animals and they think it's an impulsive buy, and then they realise it's actually a life commitment because these animals require 24-hour supervision, the attention. A lot of people just have one, then the animal becomes lonely. They need to be together. It's a big commitment. You know, my life changes a lot from having these animals. I can't just go on last-minute holidays. I have to think about what I'm doing. I don't sleep through the night. I'm constantly waking up and checking my cameras. It's a real toll on your life. It isn't something that should just be, you know, it's not a pet. They're not pet animals.
Indeed.
These are animals that deserve.
I'd like to think you don't get robbed if you've got a lion in your back garden.
Yeah. I don't have many burglars, but you never even know this with people these days.
Yeah. And you're able, because you've had these for so long, I mean, you're able to go in there with the lions, then you say?
Yeah, I've done a lot of contacts in full contact. I don't do overly much of it anymore because I feel that you know, that they should be left to their natural needs. But some of the animals, you know, require a lot of full-on attention because of the experience they've had in their lives before. You know, some people I've got monkeys that came out of somebody's house, like in an aviary, and they do require a lot of, because they're imprinted on humans, they require a lot of attention. So we vary it from species to species. But if we can leave them to the natural, the way that they should live, that's how we do it.
Is it fair to say that if somebody is hell-bent on getting hold of something, there is always, sadly, a way to do that?
I mean, luckily enough, we live on an island, so most of these illegal pet sort of dealers are far up in Europe. Yeah. So getting something like a lion is quite difficult because of the import procedures that DEFRA have got in place to stop that from happening. Sure. In a nutshell, yes, it is possible, but I would say the level of paperwork and what you need and the experience you need to show to be able to keep these animals, it's actually super difficult to do it. You know, we have a risk assessment for everything, for a safe working practice for everything, and you have to show experience as well. And the most important thing is public safety, because if public safety is compromised, then the animal welfare is compromised, because if the animal escapes, you know, would probably have to be shot. Which then, so the most important thing is making sure that us as humans are safe to be able to enable the animals to be safe as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just build a cage, put a lion in it, get a bit of paperwork, there you go. Yeah. It's not like that. It's a very stringent procedure.
Indeed.
So it should be.
Yeah, I was about to say, as it should be. Listen, Rhys, great to have you on with us. Thank you very much indeed. Rhys Oliver, conservationist, the exotic animal trade. You can only imagine. I mean, even with, you know, like snakes, just having a snake in a tank that is barely the size of the snake. You just think, you know, and people go, oh, I love my snake, you know, he's really lovely, he's called Sid, and he's, you know, he sits on my shoulder and he knows me and I know him, and I give him a little stroke and then put him back. You must know that that's not really the place for a snake in your one-bedroom house in Cleethorpes. It's probably not ideal. And then when you start to get into other stuff, you know, like monkeys, and it's only really down to the vanity, isn't it, of individuals who go, yeah, I quite fancy owning one of those little finger monkeys because they're very cute, aren't they great? And then you sit them in a bird cage. It's used to the Amazon, and it's in a bird cage. I mean, most zoos these days are conservationist sort of led, and their spacing is so much more considerate than it was back in the day. And most, or many, maybe is more accurate, seem to have conservation plans. If you look at what they do down there at Port Lympne and Howlett, they are part of big global plans to, you know, rebreed and then get animals back into the wild. I certainly have a mate who was ferociously against zoos until he looked into the conservation aspects of some zoos. And now his argument, you know, real sort of, I wouldn't say an animal rights protester, but he very much in that field. Now he kind of acknowledges that actually the planet we live on actually needs zoos for animal survival, or some breeds of animals. It's desperately required. You get into sort of white rhinos and that kind of territory, these things are rarities. But, you know, unless you've really got the kit and the space to make that happen, why would you want to? If nothing else, it's absolutely overwhelming, as he just said, Reese, for your life. You can't just go on holiday and ask your neighbour, oh, could you mind looking after the house for a couple of weeks? Well, yeah, walk the dog, yeah, and feed the lions as well, if you wouldn't mind. Well, what, with me leg? Let's go back to your calls. Big issues up this afternoon include, of course, on a more serious note, Mr Macron is here for a three-day state visit. What's that announcement likely to be reflecting when it comes to migration, if there is an announcement at all? Kevin is in Basingstoke. What have you got for us, Kev? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon. I think working with the French is the best way forward, really. I mean, we can't solve the problem on our own. So. Yeah. They are coming from France, so we should be working from the French. And also, a lot of your callers, I think, listen to Richard Tice because they repeat the nonsense that he comes out with. They say things like, we should just take them straight back to France. You can't just sail into French waters without permission. You'd be breaking the law. I mean, and if he did do that, what's to stop the French bringing them straight back again? Also, somebody said about fishing. We can't, if the French don't stop them coming over, we shouldn't let them fish in our waters.
Yep.
But would that be breaching the Brexit deal? You can't just make laws up.
Well, you'd be breaching the Brexit deal in a state of emergency, wouldn't you? You'd be saying, well, hang on a second, we have nearly 200,000 people that have illegally come across the channel. We have an emergency. The French are in greater control of this than we are, so we have to take drastic measures. Like a wartime response requires sometimes moving out of the conventions of the framework of law.
But it's not a state of emergency.
What, 200,000 people pitching up in your country? That's an emergency.
They come over here with shotguns and they was trying to overthrow the government.
Well, that would be perhaps a more serious state of emergency. I think if you've got 200,000 people and counting coming into your country over a matter of a few years, that's an emergency, right?
Well, it's not a state of emergency.
You don't think that's an emergency?
No, because they are legally allowed to come and claim asylum. That's not a state of emergency.
Well, it is when you believe you've blown the asylum myth out the water long ago. There are clearly examples of people claiming asylum, but in this form, you won't find them. That seems to be more or less what we're going on here.
No, but we're a member of the Refugee Convention.
We're a member of all sorts of things, but if something is demonstrably not working, you have to somehow... So what we are left with then is the curious situation, Kevin, where you have to just accept anyone that arrives on a boat. tough.
No, you don't have to. No, you don't have to accept everyone that arrives on the boat. You go through legal process, and if they after that process has been carried out, if they are here, if their claim is successful, they can stay. If not, they can't.
The problem is the ineptitude or the shortcomings of the legal process, because there's no way to prove that somebody is or isn't what they say they are. So if you say, I'm from Iran and I'm a Christian, you've got no way of disproving that person's Christian credentials or claims.
No, but you can't just come in and say I'm a Christian. You have to prove that you've been.
No, you don't.
By being a Christian,
you don't. You would argue it.
Persecuted in your country.
Yeah. How do you prove that?
Well, we'll go through the legal process. How do you prove anything when you're in a court of law?
Well, you're not in a court of law. You're having an interview in a warehouse somewhere in Basingstoke, and you're trying to have a chat with a border force or a lawyer, and you're going, I'm a Christian. I can't go back.
70% are given asylum. And
it's slightly less than that now.
30% aren't. So that means there is a way of determining if...
No, because you're working on the basis that process is completely adequate and just fine. And anyone you speak to who works in that world will tell you it isn't.
Ian, nothing is perfect, is it?
No.
We have a system
that doesn't work.
If we could improve that system, we would.
But we could prove that we could improve that system if we weren't part of the ECHR.
No, but that wouldn't make any difference, would it? What difference would that make if we weren't in the ECHR?
Because
all that would mean is that they would take our rights away from us. And I can't believe people
it wouldn't
have human rights.
Well, it wouldn't take our human rights away from us. It would only take it according to that one element. I mean, it's the fact you don't lose your human rights.
You can't pick and choose which.
Yes, you can. That's the problem. We've constantly gone with this, Kevin. That you can't pick and choose. We've run away with these kind of cliches. And of course, yes, you can. If a law becomes... I mean, no way when Churchill and co. wrote the ECHR they had this in mind.
You can't be a member of an agreement and say, I agree to all these...
And if the agreement has been pushed and morphed into areas that are beyond what its original purpose was, then you have to say, right, we either modify it or we leave it.
Well, in the Second World War, Hitler didn't want to... kill all the Jews. He wanted them to leave. He didn't. That wasn't his goal. He wanted the Jews to leave.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're quite right about that.
No, but because no other country would take them.
So he just built some concentration camps and killed them anyway.
Yeah. So that's why it was brought in, because we brought it in so people had the right to claim asylum. Just to stop that sort of thing happening again.
But people do have the right to claim asylum, and legitimate people claim asylum. And we know when we've helped Hong Kong and Afghanistan and Ukraine, we can demonstrably see that happening. If you've got a bunch of fighting fit, curiously, almost exclusively 23-year-old males coming over on a boat from similar places, it changes. Albania for a while. I mean, what was that all about, for God's sake?
It's not exclusively men of working age. It is 30% of women and children.
30% are not women and children. Who are you reading this from? 30% are women and children, because you saw that within one window over a 10-day period there were 30% of women and children.
And we're also
on a daily basis, almost exclusively young men.
No, it's not. It's 30% of women and children.
I just explained that to you. There's not 30% of women and children.
Well, anyway, we keep saying we're working age men. Well, we've got an ageing population and a declining birth rate in this
So we
country.
require people from a third world country who don't speak English to improve our country?
No, a lot of these people come to this country because they do speak English and they've got family members here.
Oh, right, so they're not actually asylum seekers then?
No, they are asylum seekers that come here.
And by coincidence also happen to have some family here. So I've escaped a tyrannical regime in deepest Eritrea, but by a coincidence, my Auntie Maureen lives in Bromley.
Well, they might not be. Well, I'm just telling you the facts.
No, you're telling me what's written on press releases.
No, I'm not written on. I don't read I read it from the government website or the Refugee Convention. I don't read it from the Daily Mail.
I don't dispute that's exactly where you do read it from. That's probably part of the problem. Listen, Kevin, I'm moving on not because It's not been great. It's been wonderful speaking with you, and I thank you for bringing that argument to it, as flimsy as it was. But thank you to Kevin in Basingstoke. Back with more from you coming next on Talk.
President Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, on a state visit to America in the White House. He's surprised, we're told, Donald Trump, who's blushing like a little bride. It was like a Southern belle when he discovered that Netanyahu has nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Think that's a fair nomination?
I mean, it tells you how little a nomination makes. Any Pol Sci academic, any MP, anyone could nominate for it. If Matt Goodwin was still at a university, he could nominate you.
He is at a university.
But yeah, get somebody you like, and you can rival Donald Trump for the nomination.
I'm going to insist that I get a nomination.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk coming up on 5 to 4. Let's get a voice note on that issue of immigration and the French and the British trying to solve this thing. This comes from Caroline.
Afternoon, Ian. Just how many more meetings is the UK going to have with France regarding these migrants? How many have we had to total so far, and yet we're still having meeting after meeting after meeting? It's all just more money-making scheme.
Yeah, there's a lot of meetings, aren't there? I mean, how many meetings does it take to sort it out? Persona non grata says, in fact, it's Jason. So Jason says, this is reference exotic animals. I own a Californian king snake. I've had her for 17 years. Still haven't named her. She can't have other snakes in her vivarium because she would eat them. Blimey. That terrifies me. I don't know what I'll have to look one of those up later. Jason, thank you very much. I'm always intrigued as to whether your snake knows you. I don't mean specifically Jason, but if you own a snake, are you, how au fait? How much do they, like a dog, knows its owner and wants to be with its owner? Does the snake have any of that going on? I once asked a guy who owned a big falcon that went, hunting pigeons around Westminster to stop them pooing on the roof. And I said to him, he was just walking through the grounds, and he had this huge falcon thing, whatever it was, on his arm. It was massive and it was majestic and absolutely beautiful. And I said, does the falcon, are you like the master? And she knows that, and so, you know, there's a kind of flurry of excitement, and he said, no. He said, this bird couldn't give a toss about me at all. I provide food, and that's it. If you gave it to someone else and they provided food, that'd be fine. But snakes, I don't know. Travis is in Derby. What do you got for us, Travis, on the issue of immigration?
How are you doing, Ian? Are you all right?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, we've not got long, but I'm sure you can do it, Trav.
Yeah, we will do. Firstly, Kevin, you need to get a grip. There's not 30% men and women crossing over.
No.
What, do we count dogs as well?
Well, apparently so, yeah.
So anyway, enough of that. Right, every Friday, me and a couple of mates, hard-working lads, what we do.
Yep.
You go to a pub, don't you? You have a few beers and you set the world.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
Right. Okay. So, and it's always the number one subject, like men and women up and down the country. It's immigration. What we do. What did you say? 172,000 people since 2017. So, it took us maybe 3 to 6 months to come up with an idea of how you stop your boats. Because let's face it, the Royal Navy are not going to do it. The RNLI just is like a taxi service, right? Okay. So let's move on from that. So I've come up with an idea, and my friends have called something called Operation Pushback, and it's literally like the Australian version of it.
Yep.
So we set up a GoFundMe page. We ask for volunteers and money to the total, I would say, £250,000.
Okay.
We've looked up on it on Google. You can actually rent a trawler for £10,000 a week, and you get the sea captain, you get his crew for £10,000 a week. Absolutely fantastic. Then you buy life jackets. 30 or 40 feet poles, nice and safe.
Yeah.
40 to 50 gallons of diesel. You also get 3 to 4 boats, which they're tugging around, maybe dinghies to help them out, because let's face it, once you do the pushback, they're going to stab the dinghy or they're going to jump in.
Got it.
Okay, so legalities about this is, do you know anything about what you would do about the sting operations to do with the grooming gangs and various things?
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Okay, so what you do, you get an independent cameraman, reporter, one, maybe 2 of them, to go on every single boat to make sure you do legal things.
Gotcha. So, so everything is legit. Listen, I have to cut in, Travis, for no other... We've well overshot the clock, but... You've been brilliant. I like the thinking. Let's pursue this, though, the next time we come round to this. Jeremy Kyle is here. You're looking a bit older.
Well, 60 yesterday, I have to be honest. Do you like the mug they bought me?
It says you're 59 plus.
It does, yeah. They also bought me, I have to tell you, this is brilliant. They bought me a plastic Zimmer frame.